keep saying I'll do these at like 11 o'clock, and then I end up doing them at like 9:30. I should just start doing them at 11 o'clock, shouldn't I? Then again, I have to wake up at 9 for work. Anyway. So, it's not like I'm really losing any sleep. I don't know if you can hear that noise in the background. I'm so sorry if you can. I'm going to open my sound and stuff and make sure that all of the things are right. Yes, I know I can manage my channel directly from my phone. Let's see the properties. That is the correct one, I believe. It's really difficult to tell which microphone I'm speaking on. So if I do this, yes. Okay, cool. It is my headphones. I have to send out for a package today. Because I have a thing coming, and quite frankly, I don't want to miss it again. I missed it last time because I went out to work and it came at 11:42, and I work at 12. So, so I missed it, which sucks because it has the cutest hoodie in it, and I'm really excited to wear it. I'm probably not fitting the skirt because for some reason when you buy online, like, you just can't find skirts that fit like a 16 to 18 waistline. Like, I don't consider myself plus size, but the fashion world does, you know? Which sucks. Because I want to wear cute things, but I can't because all the cute things are made for really, really skinny people. You know, back when I was really skinny too. So, I'm already thinking about the next set of books that I want to read. And there is this book that I have called The Left Hand of God, and it's really interesting, and I keep getting to like all the way through the first book and then like midway through the second one, and then forgetting everything because I just put it down and I don't pick it up for the longest time. So I might actually read that on stream just to get all the way through it and find out what happens at the end, because it is so interesting. It's like this kid gets sent to like this really super religious school that essentially functions like a prison, as most schools do, and they're forced to like do sword play and religious worship, and they eat gruel and, you know, all the typical dystopian things. And he finds out that the the head of the place, they actually eat really nice meals, and they want some for themselves. I'm paraphrasing the entire book here because this is just what I remember of it. Keep in mind that I didn't remember the entire preamble of the book that I'm currently reading. And they find a way to get upstairs, and they find that not only are they having really beautiful feasts, but they're also housing really, really pretty women, like super pretty girls. And, you know, the main cast being entire boys, they're all like immediate fucking googly eyes for them. It's really funny to watch them realise that they're growing up. I'm not going to spoil too much of the book, but they manage to run away. And he finds another pretty lady, because all the ladies in these books have to be pretty, otherwise why would you read them, right? I'm not saying it that's misogynist, I'm saying that I'm bi and I appreciate it. I should really tidy up my space too. But the problem is, they said that my package is going to come between 9:40 and 1 o'clock. And that is like the entire time that I stream. So I might just have to like up and run to the door, because Royal Mail just hates standing there for more than 10 seconds to be at the door. Like, we've had to knock on the window because this house is separated into 2 flats. And like, we've had to knock on the window because they've assumed that the person's downstairs, and because they don't see any movement downstairs, obviously no one's in. It's like, the package is addressed to the top flat. Why are you looking downstairs? Please, let me have my package. Stop running away. Oh, yeah, I've got chocolate again. Oh yeah, I should turn my that would help. You know, turning my stuff on so that my laptop doesn't die mid-reading. I appreciate you, one viewer who is listening to me just absolutely ramble instead of reading. Gosh. Yeah, today I'll be reading from chapter 10 to chapter 15, and then I'll probably get hounded to read more the second time, which I don't mind. This is a reading stream. I will be reading, you know, sort of, it comes with the territory. I don't have any, like, books that are small enough. Though actually, I might read The Thin Executioner, because even though the main character and that makes me cringe my face off, it's still a really good book. Like, for 3/4 of the book, the main character is, like, the biggest jackass you will ever meet. He is the worst, trademark. Like, he is the epitome of what Zero Coochie does to a motherfucker. You know? So, yeah, and then by the end, he actually learns and becomes a better person, and you're like, thank you, main character. I appreciate your character growth, otherwise I might have had to go into the book to kill you myself. Also, it is rife with racism. Hi, Chaos! Nice to see you. I'm rambling about what book I should read after the Book of Lost Things, and I have quite a few ideas. I immediately got posh the second you came in. I'm like, I have so many books that I want to read again. I have like, I think the first issue of Vampirates, which I loved as a kid. I have 2 issues of Dexter, which I also love. Dexter's amazing as a book. I didn't like the TV show because the book actually like goes into his thought process, and I like that. The Third Executioner, beautiful. The Left Hand of God would be interesting, because again, you know, I was being murdered. XIV is 14. That's the online one, isn't it? I get murdered in Final Fantasy 14 too, and I'm meant to be the healer, so ayo. Book's better, definitely. Yep. I have a book that needs to be, maybe not burned, but maybe stashed away for memory's sake, because it has my name in it, so it would be devalued. That book being a Harry Potter book, and as we all know, J.K. Rowling has decided that she wants to become a trans-exclusionary radical feminist, which basically means women are women, but trans women aren't, which is wrong. Trans women are women, shut the fuck up. You're decidedly not a healer. I mean, it's fine, healing's not for everyone. It is a very stressful job, because healer is essentially being like the babysitter. The tank is like the dad, and the healer is like the babysitter. And like dad's come home, you know, he's like, kids, get yourself in order. And most of the kids will listen to the tank. They'll be like, okay, cool, you're here to protect us, that's fine. And then one of them, for some ungodly reason, will go like next to the tank, and you're like, no, he's pulling aggro away from you guys so you guys can back end the boss or the enemy or whatever. And there'll be that one idiot, and then they'll die, and then they'll complain to the babysitter, why haven't you healed me? And I'll be stood there going, because you little shit, you're out of position. You should have been over there, behind. All you need to know, Chaos, is if there is a tank, and the tank has a bunch of enemies, and all the enemies are facing the tank, you go behind the enemies. And you kill the enemies from behind them, because the tank is taking all of the damage. That way the healer heals the tank, and if any like AoE effect that the enemy has hits anyone else, the healer will just AoE heal it. So like, don't even worry, just hit the things, but from behind them, the opposite way that they're facing, otherwise you will get hit too, and the healer and the tank will be very, very angry at you. The healer and the tank is me and Imperial, because Imperial plays a Dark Knight, and I play White Mage? Yeah, I play White Mage. I also play Dancer, because I got sick of people being terrible deeps, so I just decided to be the deeps myself. I have been playing MMOs for like a really, really, really long time, so I know how these games work. Like, my first MMO ever was Fly for Fun, which like 2 people remember in the world. Technically my first MMO was .hack, but that was like a fake MMO, so yeah. Technically my first MMO was Moonbase. Is it Moonbase? Yeah, he's a Dark Knight. I know, it's very typical of him, isn't it? You could put all of the things out in front of you and just go, which one of these classes is Wolf Imperial and Dark Knight? He looked at all of them and he saw the Dark Knight stuff and he went, I can kill things by just standing there and tanking damage and then keeping myself alive and being sustained so that my partner doesn't need to worry about healing me too much. And I was like, God damn it, Wolf. God damn it. A guild, a clan, a club, a secret society. Could be any of those things, really. Also, the reason I haven't started like actually reading is because I'm waiting for a parcel. That cool, all of the above. And it said that it was going to be delivered between 9:40 and like 1 p.m. Something like that. 9:40 and 1:40. I mean, the last time I missed this parcel is because it was like, yeah, we'll deliver it between 9:40 and 1:40, and I was like, okay, cool, that's fine, so long as they get it here before I leave, which is at like 11:30. And they were like, they sent me an email like right before I left being like, oh, never mind, we'll be there like by 5 o'clock, and I was like, oh, well, that's cool, I'll be home by 5 o'clock. You know what time they delivered Chaos? You know what time that they delivered? They delivered it at 11:40. They delivered it at 11:40. You know where I was at that time? I was like 20 minutes from my workplace. I had left the house. I was gone, girl. Trademark. Honestly. I remember sitting on the benches outside of my workplace and being like, really? I'm in town next to my workplace and you guys decided to deliver when I'm out of the house? In the 20-minute period I'm not in? After you told me that you were going to delay it until like 5 o'clock, are you kidding me? I'm going to cry. I was just like moulding the entire day. So, you know. Just moulding. I mean, I guess if the door knocks, I can just like vault myself downstairs. That is if I hear the door knock and no one else is awake to hear the door knock. I have this beautiful thing called selective hearing, where if I'm focused on something else, I'm not going to hear anything that's around me. So I don't want to get like too engrossed in doing a thing, because then I'll stop paying attention to like the world and like the door. I'll miss it again. In fact, my selective hearing is so bad that my brother's fiance got me a shirt that said, I'm sorry, I have selective hearing and you have not been selected. And I'm like, that is a perfect representation of me, because yes, you have not been selected to be heard, but also it's kind of rude. I appreciate the goal though. Like the balls. And then when I went to a convention, I got myself a much nicer shirt with a little bunny rabbit under some mushrooms that said, in a world of my own, which I say to people is a nice way of saying I have selective hearing. like my hearing is very selective. I really need to get my ears checked because I feel like I'm going deaf. Like I just straight can't hear people if there's like music playing, which might also be just selective hearing. Again, it might just be selecting to listen to the music rather than hearing people, but you know, what do I know about my own body, right? Cool. It is really cute. And like a lot of like some of the people at my workplace are like creatives. So one of them does comics, which is really cool. And and my manager's a chav, which is the funniest thing because you have like a scene kid, you have me who's like looks normal but wants to be goth, like I want to be big titty goth GF, and then we have a chav, maybe two chavs, and for all intents and purposes a normal girl, and it's like we work in a shop that sells like second-hand things, primarily video games, and like half the staff are women. So people come in, they're like, oh, it's so refreshing to see like a store full of women, and you're like, yeah, it kind of is, but at the same time, like 90% of people probably come in, ask us a thing, and expect us not to be capable of answering it because we're women. It's like, nah, I know nothing about technology. I know nothing about it. I know games, but I don't know anything about technology. You could ask me what iPhone 13 does. No clue. It can make calls, it can text, and it's way too expensive. Those are my opinions on iPhones. Like, if you're getting a phone specifically just to, like, text and call people, just get an Android. Or get, like, you know, an old phone, like a Nokia, or like a flip phone. Or a BlackBerry, if BlackBerry still exists, you know, like just a basic phone. You don't need a smartphone to do calls and text, so, you know. Or take pictures, even some really old phones that do take pictures. But yeah. God. I'm thinking about like my first phone and like my new phone. A lot of people, want to have Androids, but then like but then they use iTunes, so like they've spent too much money. They've basically gone into like the sunk cost fallacy where they've spent so much money on this one thing that they just can't conceive to give it up. And I'm like, if you want a phone that you like and it's cheap and it's an Android, go for it. Because you can get second-hand iPods for like really cheap. And iPods also use iTunes. You know? Oh my god, Motorola. Yeah. My first phone, I don't know what it was called, but it was like this really, really tiny blue flip phone that my mum passed down to me as my first phone because we were just like going into the age of people using like little phones and with them. And like I didn't have a phone until I was like over the age of 10, you know, like I was in like late primary school when I got my first phone, and it was a little flip phone that could call, text, and you could play like Snake and Tetris on it. And as I grew up, phones just progressively got like more complex. Like in secondary school, oh, I love this phone. It was one of those slidey ones, where you could slide the top off of it, and it would have a keyboard underneath that you could text on, that you could type on. Yeah, I was born in 1993, so I'm a little bit ahead of of your guys' generation. So like everything that I've experienced, you guys have experienced. Um, so like, yeah, and the keyboard on it was so good, and all of I hate it when people when they're like, oh, you'll have no idea what a VHS tape is or whatever, and you kind of stood there going, they grew up with us. You realise this, right? Like they were only like a few years behind us. You know? I, I mean, it's because I feel old, like in comparison to like a lot of people. I mean, my brothers must feel even older because my youngest of older brothers is like 6 years apart from me, you know. So he was 6 when I was born. I didn't go to school with any of my siblings, which made it difficult in school because a lot of the people in schools would always hang around with like their cousins or their like brothers and sisters or like family of some description, and then there was me who like didn't. I mean, like cassettes. I remember cassettes. Like I remember sitting in the attic watching VHS tapes of Disney films. You know, like. And I think that's why me and Imperial get along so well, because like he also remembers growing up around VHS tapes, so like me and him can look at each other and we can go, oh my god, do you remember floppy disks? And he'll be like, yeah, I remember floppy disks. And I'm like, we used to have a floppy disk that had those little guys that run around the screen, and they'll clone and they'll reproduce, and like they'll crawl around your screen and stuff. We used to have one of them but of sheep, and it was, I remember putting that in and just having them all around my screen and just giggling to myself. There's probably like a ton of me as a kid, just somewhere, you know. So like, my mum still has those old like photo albums. It's, yeah, God, I no, I don't remember much, but like I remember some bits. There, around Christmas time, there was this really old VHS that I remember watching called like the 12 Days of Christmas, and it was about this fairy princess who couldn't laugh or smile, like she was just unimpressed constantly, and her father was doing a crossword, and he asked her to get like a list of things that she wants, for Christmas, because she's a princess, so she can get whatever she wants. And the opposing king of like another place is like, I will have her heart, I will get her to marry me, and sends his squire out to take the the list of what she wants. And I mean, you might have seen it too, and he instead accidentally steals the crossword, and he brings it back to his king or whatever, or his prince, and he's like, you will go out, you will procure those things, you will present them to the princess in my name and my honor, and if you don't, I will basically kill you. Child friendly version of like kill you, just like hand across the throat or whatever. And so the squire's like, well, fuck, better skedaddle. So he skedaddles on, and he brings her all these things, and she's like really unimpressed with him, and she's like, piss off, you fucking little twat. And he's like, alright, I'll leave, but I have to come back, otherwise, you know, it's between getting boiled alive by the princess or being murked by my own prince, so you know, I guess I have no choice in the matter. By the end he manages to make a laugh, because of like the sheer amount of things that just go wrong by the 12th day, you know, like 12 lords are leaping and they leap into like everything else and they knock him over and everything goes to shit, and she just fucking cackles at the misery. Oh, the misery. And the prince comes out and is like, yes, I will have your hand, fair lady, like I've been waiting for this moment my entire life. And she's like, fuck you, I'm not marrying you, I'm marrying the squire, he's funny as fuck. And he's so devastated by this news, and the squire's like, damn, yeah, it ended, I had a good ending after all. So yes, yes, little man, you did. Yes, little man. You go, little guy. I did I did the cardinary. I did a sin of book reading. I dog-eared some of the pages, and people will be like, "Mouse, how could you? How could you dog-ear the pages of a book?" And I'm like, "Well, first of all, it's my book, so I will do whatever I wish with it. And second of all, it's to help me keep tabs on all my favourite sections of the story so that I can go back and just read my favourite sections of the story. There's also one that tells me when the end of the book is. This book is 348 pages long and then goes on for until like page 502 of just autobiography and like fairy tales. So yeah. To be fair, at the time this book was £6.99. So how expensive would that be today with like inflation? Then again, I don't remember when I got this book. Yeah. Oh. I mean, to be fair, I probably could have just made like, I probably just could have pressed like sheets of paper or flowers or other such things. Math's more expensive, yeah. It would be like really expensive. It'd probably be like 15 quid or something today, because a lot of books are like 15 quid, which is awful for a book, you know? I can understand like artists need to live, but also 15 quid. You really have to like yeah, they can fall out. It's the Works. I don't know if you've ever been into a Works. They do like 3 for like a tenner, so you can get like 3 books and they'll be 10 quid, and it's like nice. I have like so many books, but like they were all on my nightstand. No, not my nightstand. It's like a long wooden thing that I had my like old radiation TV on. Forgot what they were called. The blocky ones, like the super blocky TVs, like before they all became flat screens. Yeah, I had one of them, and then it was like it was shelves. Yeah, it was like shelves, but it stood rather than being hung on the wall. And I had all my books on the bottom of it. And then I moved out, and my mum was like, "Well, I'm gonna have to put these books somewhere." Yeah, for me that's Bon Marché. Bon Marché are always going out of business, yet never do. It's so weird. I imagine it's because people like the stuff, like the shop enough, so they'll go in, they'll buy like a bunch of things, and like it'll get a rush of people in to get the stuff that they want to get before it closes, and then they have enough money to get back into the green. So let's get back into the red. Sorry, or the black. I think it's the black. Yeah, because you go into the red, that's bad, but in the black, it's good. And yeah, so because the works are really, really good. Like if you like drawing, the works have some really nice, you know. I mean, fair. I've also like trying not to dox myself in 4K, so I'm being vague about most things. Uh, yeah, it's really good for like drawing supplies. I go in there like every so often just have a look at like what books they have and like papers and stuff. I wonder if I got the Book of Lost Things from the works. 'Cause I don't know where I got this book from. You know? I think I did get it from in there actually. If it even existed at the time. Anyway, I should probably start reading because it's like 10 o'clock. To be fair, if someone can get your location through 4 proxies, I'd be too impressed to be mad that they knew at that point. You know, like I'd still be worried, but at the same time I'd be like, well, if you've managed to get through 4 proxies to find out my exact location, like damn. That's dedication. Right. We be out here. I added a little chat widget to my thing, and now I need to sort this out because I also have one on my OBS as well, so because I don't have one normally when I'm playing games, so I put one on my overlay, and then I forgot that I have one on OBS already, so I'm going to have to hide it. I'm going to hide that, I'm going to save, and then that should fix it. In theory. Yes. Cool. It fixed it. It's also really tiny on here. I wonder if I can increase the text size. Oh, I mean, okay, cool. What? I tried to send a message through OBS because my chat's up there, and it's asking me to log in to the chat to send a message, and I'm like, surely I don't need to do that. I'm the streamer. OBS, please. Yay. Right. So the show's been going on for like 41 minutes, and all I've been doing is talking nonsense. So I'm gonna start reading now, and hope that the door doesn't knock in the meantime. Observe as I get through the first page of the door. Chapter 10 of Tricksters and Trickery. David slept that night upon the woodsman's bed. It smelled of dried berries and pine cones, and the animal scent of the woodsman's leathers and furs. The woodsman dozed in a chair by the fire, his axe close to hand, and his face cast in flickering shadows by the light of dying flames. It took David a long time to get to sleep. Even though the woodsman assured him that the cottage was secure, the slits in the windows had been covered up, and there was even a metal plate pierced with small holes set halfway up the chimney to prevent the creatures of the forest from entering that way. The woods beyond were silent, but it was not the quiet of peace and rest. The woodsman had told David that the forest changed at night. Half-formed creatures, beings from deep beneath the ground, colonized it once the half-light faded, and most of the nocturnal animals were dead or had learned to be even warier of predation than before. The boy was aware of a strange mix of feelings. There was fear, of course, and an aching regret that he had ever been foolish enough to leave the security of his own home and enter this new world. He wanted to return to the life he knew, however difficult it might be, but he also wanted to see a little more of this land, and he had not yet found an explanation for the sound of his mother's voice. Was this what happened to the dead? Did they travel into this land, perhaps, on the way to another place? Was his mother trapped here? Could a mistake have been made? Maybe she wasn't meant to die, and now she was trying to hold on here in the hope that someone would find her and bring her back to those whom she loved. No, David could not return. Not yet. The tree was marked, and he would find his way home, once he had discovered the truth about his mother and the part this world now played in her existence. He wondered if his father had missed him yet, and the thought made his eyes water. The impact of the German plane would have woken everyone, and the garden was probably already sealed off by the army or the ARP. David's absence would have been quickly noticed. They would be looking for him at this very moment. He felt a kind of satisfaction in the knowledge that, by his absence, he had made himself more important in his father's life. Now perhaps his dad would be worried more about him and less about work and codes and Rose and Georgie. What if they didn't miss him? What if life became easier for them now that he was gone? His father and Rose could start a new family, untroubled by the remnant of the old, except once a year, perhaps, when the anniversary of his disappearance came around. In time, though, even that would fade, and then he would be largely forgotten, remembered only in passing, just as the memory of Rose's uncle, Jonathan Dolby, had been resurrected only by David's own questions about him. David tried to push such thoughts aside and closed his eyes. At last he fell asleep, and he dreamt of his father, and of Rose, and his new half-brother, and of things that burrowed up from beneath the earth, waiting for the fears of others to give them shape. And in the dark corners of his dreams a shadow capered, and it threw its crooked hat in the air with glee. David woke to the sound of the woodsman preparing food. They ate hard white bread at the little table by the far wall, and drank strong black tea from crudely made mugs. Outside, Only the faintest trace of light showed in the sky. David assumed that it was very early in the morning indeed. So early that the sun had not yet dawned, but the woodsman said the sun had not been truly visible for a long time, and this was as much light as it was ever seen in the world. It made David wonder if he had somehow travelled far to the north, a place where night lasted for months and months in winter, but even the Arctic North, the long dark winters, were balanced by days of endless light in summer. No, this was no northern land. This was elsewhere. After they had eaten, David washed his face and hands in a bowl and tried to clean his teeth with his finger. When he had finished, he performed his little rituals of touching and counting, and it was only when he became aware of a silence in the room that he realized the woodsman was watching him quietly from his chair. "What are you doing?" asked the woodsman. It was the first time that the question had ever been posed to David, and he was stumped for a moment as he tried to provide a plausible excuse for his behaviour. In the end, he settled on the truth. "They're rules," he said simply. "They're my routines. I started doing them to try to keep my mother from harm, and I thought they would help." "And did they?" David shook his head. "No, I don't think so. Or maybe they did, but just not enough. I suppose you think they're strange. I suppose you think I'm strange for doing them." He was afraid to look at the woodsman, fearful for what he might see in the man's eyes. Instead, he stared into the bowl and saw his reflection distort upon the water. Eventually, the woodsman spoke. "We all have our routines," he said softly, "but they must have a purpose and provide an outcome that we can see and take some comfort from, or else they have no use at all. Without that, they are like the endless pacings of a caged animal. If they are not madness itself, then they are a prelude to it." The woodsman stood and showed David his axe. "See here," he said, pointing with his finger at the blade. "Every morning I make certain that my axe is clean and keen. I look to my house and check that its windows and doors remain secure. I tend to my land, disposing of weeds and ensuring that the soil is watered. I walk through the forest, clearing those paths that need to be kept open. Where the trees have been damaged, I do my best to repair what has been harmed. These are my routines, and I enjoy doing them well." He laid a hand gently on David's shoulder, and David saw understanding in his face. "Rules and routines are good, but they must give you satisfaction. Can you truly say you gain that from touching and counting?" David shook his head. "No," he said, "but I get scared when I don't do them. I'm afraid of what might happen." "Then find routines that allow you to feel secure when they are done. You told me that you have a new brother. Look to him each morning. Look to your father and your stepmother. Tend to the flowers in the garden or in the pots upon the windowsill. Seek others who are weaker than you are, and try to give them comfort where you can. Let these be your routines and the rules that govern your life." David nodded, but he turned his face from the woodsman to hide what might be read upon it. Perhaps the woodsman was right, but David could not bring himself to do those things for Georgie and Rose. He would try to take on some other, easier duties, but to keep safe these intruders into his life was beyond him. The woodsman took David's old clothes, his torn dressing gown, his dirty pyjamas, his single muddy slipper, and placed them in a rough sack. He slung the sack over his shoulder and unlocked the door. "Where are we going?" said David. "We're going to return you to your own land," said the woodsman. "But the hole in the tree disappeared." "Then we'll try to make it appear again." "But I haven't found my mother." The woodsman looked at him sadly. "Your mother is dead. You told me so yourself." "But I heard her. I heard her voice. Perhaps—" "Or something like it," said the woodsman. "I don't pretend to know every secret of this land, but I can tell you that it is a dangerous place, and becoming more so with every day that passes. You must go back, for Luke Leroy was right about one thing. I can't protect you. I can barely protect myself. Now come, this is a good time to travel, for the night beasts are in their deepest sleep, and the worst of the daylight ones are not yet awake." So David, perceiving that he had little choice in the matter, followed the woodsman from the cottage and into the forest. Time and again the woodsman would stop and listen, his hand raised as a signal to David that he should remain silent. "Where are the loops and the wolves?" David asked eventually, after they had walked for perhaps an hour. The only signs of life that he had seen were birds and insects. "Not far away, I fear," replied the woodsman. "They will scavenge for food in other parts of the forest where they are less at risk of attack, and in time they will try once again to steal you away. This is why you must leave here before they return." David shivered at the thought of Leroy and his wolves descending upon him, their jaws and claws tearing at his flesh. He was beginning to understand the cost that might have to be paid in searching for this place of his mother, but it seemed as if the decision to return home had already been made for him, at least for now. He could always come back here again, if he chose. After all, the sunken garden still remained, assuming the German plane had not entirely destroyed it when it crashed. They came to the glade of enormous trees through which he had first entered the woodsman's world. As they reached it, the woodsman stopped so suddenly that David almost ran into him. Cautiously, he peered around the man's back in order to glimpse what it was that had caused him to stop. "Oh no," gasped David. Every tree, as far as the eye could see, was marked with string, and every string, David's nose told him, was daubed with the same foul-smelling substance that the woodsman had used to keep the animals from gnawing upon it. There was no way of telling which tree was the one that marked the doorway from David's world to this one. He walked on a little, trying to find the hollow from which he had emerged, but every tree was similar, every bark smooth. It seemed even the hollows and gnarls that made each one distinctive had been filled in or altered, and the little path that once wound through the forest was now entirely gone, so the woodsman had no bearings to follow. Even the wreckage of the German bomber was nowhere to be seen, and the furrow that it had carved through the earth had been filled in. It must have taken hundreds of hours, and the work of many, many hands to achieve such an end, thought David. How could it have been done in a single night, and without leaving even one footprint upon the ground? Who would so... I might as well say who would do such a thing, but it says who would sew such a thing, which is like the first typo I've actually seen in a published book. Oh dear. Who would do such a thing, he asked. I guess it didn't come in spell tracks because sew is a word. And this is quite a long book. Always beta read your books, kids, and get like 3 different people to look at it at 3 different places in time. Fresh eyes catch all mistakes. "A trickster," said the woodsman. "A crooked man in a crooked hat." "But why?" said David. "Why didn't he just take away the string that you had tied? Wouldn't that have worked just as well?" The woodsman thought for a moment before answering. "Yes," he said, "but it wouldn't have been so amusing to him, and it wouldn't have made such a good story." "A story?" asked David. "Whatever do you mean?" "You're part of a story," said the woodsman. "He likes to create stories. He likes to store up tales to tell. This will make a very good story." "But how will I get home?" asked David. Now that his means of returning to his own world was gone, he suddenly wanted very much to be there. Whereas when it had seemed that the woodsman was trying to force him to return against his will, David wanted nothing more than to stay in the new land and look for his mother. It was all very peculiar. "He doesn't want you to get home," said the woodsman. "I've never done anything to him," said David. "Why is he trying to keep me here? Why is he being so mean?" The woodsman shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "Then who does?" said David. He almost shouted in frustration. He was starting to wish there was someone around who knew a little more than the woodsman. The woodsman was fine for decapitating wolves and giving unwanted advice, but he didn't seem to be keeping up with developments in the kingdom. "The king," said the woodsman at last. "The king might know." "But I thought you told me that he wasn't in control anymore, that no one had seen him in a long time." "That doesn't mean he isn't aware of what's happening," said the woodsman. "They say the king has a book. A book of lost things. Roll credits. It is his most prized possession. He keeps it hidden in the throne room of his palace, and no one is permitted to look upon it but him. I have heard it said that it contains in its pages all of the king's knowledge, and that he turns to it in times of trouble or doubt to give him guidance. Perhaps there's an answer within it to the questions of how to get you home. David tried to read the expression on the woodsman's face. He wasn't sure why, but he had a strong feeling that the woodsman wasn't telling him the entire truth about the king. Before he could question him further, the woodsman tossed the sack containing David's old clothes into a copse of bushes and started to walk back in the direction they had come. "It'll be one fewer thing to carry on our journey," he said. "We have a long way to go." With a last longing look at the forest of anonymous trees, David turned and followed the woodsman back to the cottage. When they were gone, and all was quiet, a figure emerged from beneath the spreading roots of a great and ancient tree. Its back was hunched, its fingers were twisted, and it wore a crooked hat upon its head. It moved quickly through the undergrowth until it came to a copse of bushes dotted with swollen, frost-sweetened berries, but it ignored the fruits in favour of the rough, dirty sack that lay amid the leaves. It reached inside, removed the top of David's pyjamas, and held the clothing to its face, sniffing deeply. "Boy lost," it whispered to itself, "and child lost to come." And with that it grabbed the sack and was swallowed up by the shadows of the forest. I mean, that's like the creepiest way you could introduce a guy, right? Like, a fucking grabs a young boy's pajamas, sniffs the armpit. That's it, that's the story. Here's a book of lost things. Anyway, thank you guys for coming to the stream. I'm kidding. I'm stretching my legs. Chapter 11. Of the children lost in the forest, and what befell them. David and the woodsman returned to the cottage without incident. There they packed food into 2 leather bags and filled a pair of tin canteens from the stream that ran behind the house. David saw the woodsman kneel by the water's edge and examine some marks upon the damp ground, but said nothing to David about them. David glanced at them in passing and thought that they looked like the tracks left by a big dog or a wolf. There was a little water at the bottom of each, so David knew that they were recent. The woodsman armed himself with his axe, a bow, a quiver of arrows, and a long knife. Finally, he took a short-bladed sword from a storage chest. After only the slightest pause to blow some of the dust off it, he gave the sword to David, and a leather belt upon which to wear it. David had never held a real sword before, and his knowledge of swordsmanship did not extend much further than playing pirates with wooden sticks, but having the sword at his side made him feel stronger and a little braver. The woodsman locked the cottage, then laid his hand flat upon the door and lowered his head, as though praying. He looked sad, and David wondered if, for some reason, the woodsman thought that he might not see his home again. Then they moved into the forest, heading northeast, and kept up a steady pace while the sticky luminescence that passed for daylight led their way. That says sickly, not sticky. I can read, I promise. After a few hours, David grew very tired. The woodsman allowed him to rest, but only for a little while. We must be clear of the woods before nightfall, he told David, and the boy did not have to ask him why. Already he feared to hear the silence of the woods shattered by the howling of wolves and loops. As they walked, David had a chance to examine his surroundings. He was unable to name any of the trees that he saw, although aspects of some were familiar to him. A tree that looked like an old oak had pine cones dangling beneath its evergreen leaves. Another was the size and shape of a large Christmas tree, the bases of its silver leaves dotted with clusters of red berries. Most of the trees, though, were bare. Occasionally, David would catch sight of some childlike flowers, their eyes wide and curious, although the first sign of approaching the woodsman and boy, they would draw their leaves protectively around themselves, quite gently, until the threat had passed. "What are those flowers called?" he asked. "They have no name," said the woodsman. "Sometimes children stray from the path and become lost in the forest, and they are never seen again. They die there, consumed by beasts or slain by evil men, and their blood soaks into the ground. In time, one of these flowers will spring up, often far from where the child breathed his last. They cluster together, just like frightened children might. They are the forest's way of remembering them, I think. The forest feels the loss of a child." David had learned that the woodsman generally did not speak unless spoken to first, so it was left to him to ask questions which the woodsman would answer as best as he could. He tried to give David some sense of the geography of this place. The king's castle lay many miles to the east, and the area in between was sparsely populated, with only the occasional settlement to disturb the landscape. A deep chasm separated the woodsman's forest from the territories further to the east, and they'd have to cross it to continue their journey to the king's castle. To the south was a great black sea, but few ever ventured far upon it. It was the domain of sea beasts, dragons of the waters, and constantly racked by storms and huge waves. North and west lay ranges of mountains, but they were impassable for most of the year, their peaks topped with snow. While they walked, the woodsman spoke more to David of the loops. "In the old days, before the coming of the loops, wolves were predictable creatures," he explained. Each pack, rarely numbering more than 15 or 20, had a territory where it would live and hunt and breed. Then the loops began to appear, and everything changed. The packs began to grow, allegiances were formed, territories grew larger or ceased to have meaning at all, and cruelty raised its head. In the past, perhaps half of all wolf pups died. They needed more food than their parents for their size, and if food was scarce, then they starved. Sometimes they were killed by their own parents, but only if they showed signs of disease or madness. For the most part, wolves were fine parents, sharing their kills with young, guarding them, giving them care and affection. But the loops brought with them new ways of dealing with the young. Only the strongest are now fed, never more than 2 or 3 to a litter, sometimes not even that. The weak are eaten. In that way, the pack itself remains strong, but it has altered their nature. Now they turn upon one another, and there is no loyalty between them. Only the rule of loops keeps them under control. Without loops, they would be as they once were, I think. The woodsman told David how to tell the females from the males. The females had narrower muzzles and foreheads, their necks and shoulders were thinner, their legs shorter, yet they were faster when young than males of a similar age, and for that reason made better hunters and deadlier enemies. In normal wolf packs, the females were often the leaders, but once again the loops had usurped their natural order of things. There were females among them, but it was Leroy and his lieutenants who made the important decisions. Perhaps that was one of their weaknesses, suggested the woodman. Their arrogance had led them to turn their backs on thousands of years of female instinct. Now they were driven by only the desire for power. "Wolves will not give up prey," said the woodsman, "not unless they are exhausted. They can run for 10 or 15 miles at speeds far faster than man can travel, and trot for 5 miles more before they have to rest. The loops have slowed them somewhat, for they choose to walk on 2 legs, and are no longer as fleet as they once were, but on foot we are still no match for them. We must hope that when we reach our destination tonight there are horses to be found. There is a man who deals in them. I have gold enough to buy us a mount." There were no trails to follow. Instead, they relied upon the woodsman's knowledge of the forest. Although as they travelled further and further from his home, he stopped more frequently, examining growths of moss and the shapes the wind had carved from the trees in order to satisfy himself that they had not strayed. And all that time they passed only one other dwelling that lay in brown ruins. It appeared to David to have melted rather than fallen into disrepair, and only its stone chimney remained standing, blackened but intact. He could see where molten droplets had cooled and hardened upon the walls, and the buckled spaces where the windows had collapsed in upon themselves. The route they were taking brought him close enough to touch the structure, and now it was clear that there were chunks of a lighter brown substance embedded in the walls. He rubbed his hand upon the door frame, then chipped away at it with a nail. He recognized the texture, and the faint smell that arose. "It's chocolate," he exclaimed, "and gingerbread." He broke off a larger piece and was about to taste it when the woodsman knocked it from his hands. "No, it may look and smell sweet, but it hides its own poison yet." And he told David another story. The Woodsman's second tale. Any guesses on what it's going to be? Perfect. The Woodsman's second tale. Once upon a time, there were 2 children, a boy and a girl. I wonder indeed. Their father died, and their mother married again, but their stepfather was an evil man. He hated the children and resented their presence in his home. He came to despise them even more when the crops failed and famine came, for they ate valuable food that he would rather have kept for himself. He begrudged them every meager bite that he was forced to give them, and as his own hunger grew, he began to suggest to his wife that they might eat the children and thereby save themselves from death, for she could always give birth to more children when times improved. His wife was horrified. She feared what her new husband might do to them when her back was turned, yet she realized that she could no longer afford to feed them herself, so she took them deep, deep into the forest, and there she abandoned them to fend for themselves. The children were very frightened, and they cried themselves to sleep that first night. But in time they grew to understand the forest. The girl was wiser and stronger than her brother, and it was she who learned to trap small animals and birds, and to steal eggs from nests. The boy preferred to wander or to daydream, waiting for his sister to provide whatever she could catch to feed them both. He missed his mother, and wanted to return to her. Some days he did nothing but cry from dawn till dusk. He desired his old life back, and he made no effort to embrace the new. One day he did not return when his sister called his name. She went in search for him, leaving a trail of blossoms behind her so she would be able to find her way back to the little supply of food, until she came to the edge of a small clearing, and there she saw the most extraordinary house. Its walls were made of chocolate and gingerbread, its roof was slated with slabs of toffee, and the glass in its windows was formed from clear sugar. Embedded in its walls were almonds and fudge and candied fruits. Everything about it spoke of sweetness and indulgence. Her brother was picking nuts from the walls when she found him, and his mouth was dark with chocolate. "Don't worry, there's nobody home," he said. "Try it, it's delicious." He held out a piece of chocolate to her, but she did not take it at first. Her brother's eyelids were half closed, so overcome was he by the wonderful taste of the house. His sister tried to open the door, but it was locked. She peered through the glass, but the curtains were drawn, and she couldn't see inside. She did not want to eat, for something about the house made her uneasy, and the smell of chocolate was too much for her, and she allowed herself to nibble on a piece. It tasted even better than she had imagined, and her stomach cried out for more. So she joined her brother, and together they ate and ate until they had consumed so much that in time they fell into a deep sleep. When they awoke, they were no longer lying on the grass beneath the trees of the forest. Instead, they were inside the house, trapped in a cage that hung from the ceiling. A woman was fueling an oven with logs. She was old and foul-smelling. Piles of bones lay stacked on the floor by her feet, the remains of other children who had fallen prey to her. Fresh meat, she whispered to herself. Fresh meat for old Gamma's oven. The little boy began to cry, but his sister hushed him. The woman came to them and peered through the bars of the cage. Her face was covered with black warts, her teeth was worn and crooked like old gravestones. "Now which of you will be first?" she asked. The boy tried to hide his face, as though by doing so he might avoid the attentions of the old woman, but his sister was braver. "Take me," she said. "I am plumper than my brother, and will make a better roast for you. While you eat me, you can fatten him up, so that he will feed you for longer when you cook him." The old woman cackled with joy. "Clever girl," she cried, although not so clever as to avoid Gamma's plate. She opened the cage and reached in, grabbing the girl by the scruff of her neck and dragging her out. Then she locked the cave once again and brought the girl to the oven. It was not yet hot enough, but soon it would be. "I will never fit in there," said the girl. "It's too small." "Nonsense," said the old woman. "I've put bigger than you in there, and they've cooked just fine." The girl looked doubtful. "But I have long limbs and fat upon them. No, I will never manage to get in that oven. And if you do squeeze me in, you'll never get me out again." The old woman took the girl by the shoulder and shook her. "I was wrong about you," she said. "You're an ignorant, foolish girl. Look, I'll show you how big this oven is." She climbed up and stuck her head and shoulders into the mouth of the oven. "See," she said, and her voice echoed within, "there's room to spare for me, let alone a girl like you." And while the old woman's back was turned, the little girl ran at her, and with a great push she shoved her into the oven and slammed the door closed. The old woman tried to kick it open again, but the girl was too quick for her, slamming the bolt on it, for the old woman did not want her child to break free once the roasting had begun. Hello, Rockstar! Thank you for popping in and lurking. I'm reading. And leaving her trapped inside. And she fed more logs into the fire, and slowly the old woman began to cook, all the time screaming and wailing and threatening the girl with the most awful of tortures. So hot was the oven that the fats of her body began to melt, creating a stench so terrible that the little girl fell ill. Still, the old woman fought, even as her skin parted from her flesh, and her flesh from her bones, until she at last died. Then the little girl drew wood from the fire and scattered burning logs around the cottage. She led her brother away by the hand as the house melted behind them, leaving only the chimney standing tall, and they never went back there again. In the months that followed, the girl grew happier and happier in the forest. She built a shelter, and over time the shelter became a little house. She learned to fend for herself, and as the days went by she thought less and less of her old life. But her brother was never happy, and yearned always to be back with his mother. After a year and a day, he left his sister and returned to his old home. But by then his mother and stepfather were long gone, and no one could tell him where they were. He came back to the forest, but not to his sister, for he was jealous and resentful of her. Instead, he found a path in the woods that was tended and cleared of roots and briars, the bushes beside it thick with juicy berries. He followed it, eating some of the berries as he went, never noticing that the path behind him was disappearing with every step that he took. And after a time, he came into a clearing, and in the clearing was a pretty little house, with ivy on the walls and flowers by the door and a trail of smoke rising from its chimney. He smelled bread baking, and a cake lay cooling on the windowsill. A woman appeared at the door, bright and merry as his mother had once been. She waved to him, inviting him to come to her, and he did. Come in," she said. "You look tired, and berries are not enough to fill a growing boy. I have food roasting over the fire, and a soft place for you to rest. Stay as long as you wish, for I have no children, and have long wanted a son to call my own." The boy cast the berries aside as the path behind him vanished forever, and he followed the woman into the house, where a great cauldron bubbled on the fire, and a sharp knife lay waiting on the butcher's block, and he was never seen again. I mean, fair. Fair. He was, not an intelligent boy. I've just got my rota for not next week but the week after. They have me off for the entire week except for the 2 days I get paid. Thanks, guys. How dare they? Right. Chapter 11. Of bridges and riddles and the many unappealing characteristics of trolls. The light was changing as the woodsman's story ended. He looked up at the sky as if in hope that total darkness might be held back for a little longer, and suddenly he stopped walking. David followed his gaze. Above their heads, just at the level of the forest crown, David saw a black shape circling and thought that he heard a distant cawing. "Damnation," hissed the woodsman. "What is it?" asked David. "A raven." The woodsman removed his bow from his back and knocked an arrow to its string. He knelt, sighted, then released the arrow. His aim was true. The raven jerked in the air as the arrow pierced its body, then tumbled to the ground not far from where David stood. It was dead, the point of the arrow red with its blood. "Foul bird," said the woodsman, as he lifted the corpse and pulled the arrow through its body. "Why did you kill it?" asked David. "The raven and the wolf hunt together. This one was leading the pack to us. They would have fed our eyes to it out, as its reward." He looked back in the direction they had come. "They'll have to rely on scent alone now, but they are closing in on us. Make no mistake, we must hurry." They continued on their way, moving now at a slight trot, as though they themselves were tired wolves at the end of a hunt, until they reached the edge of the forest and emerged onto a high plateau. Ahead of them lay a great chasm, hundreds of feet deep and a quarter of a mile wide. A river, thin as a length of silver thread, wound through it, and David heard the cries of what might have been birds echoing from the canyon's walls. Carefully, he peered over the edge of the crevasse in hope of getting a better look at what was making the noise. He saw a shape, much larger than any bird that he had ever seen, gliding through the air, supported by the updrafts of the canyon. It had bare, almost human legs, although its toes were strangely elongated and curved like an eagle's talons. Its arms were outstretched, and from them hung great folds of skin that served as wings. It had long white hair. Its long white hair flowed in the wind, and as David listened, he heard it start to sing. The creature's voice was very high and very beautiful, and its words were clear to him. "What falls is food, what drops will die, where lives the brood birds fear to fly." Its song was taken up and echoed by other voices, and David could make out many more of the creatures moving through the canyon. The one nearest to him performed a loop in the air, at once both graceful and strangely menacing, and David glimpsed its naked body. He looked away immediately, ashamed and embarrassed. It had a female form, old, and with scales instead of skin, yet still female for all that. He risked another look, and saw the creature descending now in diminishing circles, until suddenly its wings folded in, streamlining its form, and it fell rapidly. Its clawed feet extended, and as it seemed to head directly for the canyon wall, it struck the stone, and David saw something struggle in its claws. It was a little brown mammal of some kind, scarcely bigger than a squirrel. Its paws flailed in the air as it was plucked from the rocks. Its captor changed direction and headed for an outcrop beneath David in order to feed, shrieking in triumph. Some of its rivals, alerted by its cries, approached in the hopes of stealing its meal, but it struck at the air with its wings in warning, and they drifted away. David had an opportunity to examine its face as it hovered. It resembled a woman, but was longer and thinner, with a lipless mouth that left its sharp teeth permanently exposed. Now those teeth tore into its prey, ripping great chunks of bloody fur from its body as it fed. "The brood," said the woodsman from nearby. "Another new evil that blights this part of the kingdom." "Harpies," said David. "You've seen such creatures before?" asked the woodsman. "No, not really. But I've read about them. I've seen them in my book of Greek myths for some reason. I don't think they belong in the story, yet here they are." David felt ill. He moved away from the edge of the canyon, which was so deep that it gave him vertigo. "How do we get across?" he asked. "There's a bridge about half a mile downriver," said the woodsman. "We'll make it before the light fades." He led David along the canyon, keeping close to the edge of the forest so there was no danger of them losing their footing and falling into that awful abyss where the brood waited. David could hear the beating of their wings, and on more than one occasion he thought he saw one of the creatures briefly ascend above the rim of the canyon and regard them balefully. "Don't be afraid," said the woodsman. "They are cowardly things. Were you to fall, they would pluck you from the air and tear you apart as they fought over you, but they would not dare to attack you on the ground." David nodded, but he did not feel reassured. In this land it seemed that hunger inevitably overwhelmed cowardice, and the harpies of the brood, as thin and emaciated as the wolves, looked very hungry indeed. After they had walked for a little while, their footsteps echoed by the beatings of harpies' wings, they saw a pair of bridges spanning the gorge. The bridges were identical. They were made from rope, with uneven slats of wood for the base, and they did not look terribly safe to David. The woodsman stared at them in puzzlement. "Two bridges," he said. "There was only ever one bridge at the spot." "Well," said David, matter-of-factly, "now there are two." It didn't seem like such a terrible imposition to have a choice of two ways to cross. Perhaps this was a busy spot after all. There didn't seem to be any other way to get across the chasm unless you were able to fly, or better to take your chances with the harpies. He heard flies buzzing nearby and followed the woodsman to a small hollow just out of sight of the chasm. The remains of a cottage and some stables stood there, but it was clear that the property was deserted. Outside one of the stables lay the carcass of a horde, most of the meat already picked from its bones. David watched as the woodsman peered into the stables and then looked for the open doorway of the house itself. With his head lowered, he walked back to David. "The horse dealer is gone," he said. "It looks as if he fled with whatever horses survived." "No wolves?" "The wolves?" asked David. "No, something else did this." They returned to the chasm. One of the harpies hung in the air nearby, watching them, her wings beating a fast cadence to keep her in her place. She stayed in that position for an instant too long, for suddenly her body spasmed, and the barbed silver tip of a harpoon shot through her chest, a length of rope anchoring the shaft to a point lower down in the canyon wall. The harpy grasped at the harpoon as if she could somehow wrest her body from it and escape, but then the beating of her wings began to fail and she plummeted down, twisting and turning until the rope reached the end of its length and she was brought up short, her corpse striking against the rock with a dull thudding sound. From the edge of the chasm, David and the woodsman watched the dead harpy being hauled up towards a hollow in the wall, the barbs of the harpoon preventing the corpse from sliding off. Finally, the body reached the entrance to the cave and was pulled inside. "Ugh," said David. "Trolls," said the woodsman. "That explains the second bridge." He approached the twin structures. Between them was a slab of stone on which words had been laboriously, if crudely, carved. "One lies in truth. One's truth is lies. One path is death. One path is life. One question asked, the path to guide." "It's a riddle," said David. "But what does it mean?" asked the woodsman. The answer quickly became apparent. David had never imagined that he might see a troll, though he'd always been fascinated by them. In his mind they existed as shadowy figures who lived beneath bridges, testing travellers in the hope of eating them when they failed. The creatures that climbed over the lip of the canyon, flaming torches in their hand, were not quite what he had expected. They were smaller than the woodsman, but very broad, and their skin was like that of an elephant, tough and wrinkled, Raised plates of bone, like those on the backs of some dinosaurs, ran along their spines, but their faces were similar to those of apes. Very ugly apes, admittedly, and ones that seemed to be suffering from severe acne, but apes nonetheless. Each troll took up a position in front of one of the bridges and smiled grimly. They had small red eyes that glittered sinisterly in the gathering darkness. 2 bridges and 2 paths, said David. He was thinking aloud, but caught himself before he gave anything away to the 2 trolls, and resolved to keep his thoughts to himself, until he had come to the conclusion. The trolls already had all the advantages. He didn't want to give them any more. The riddle clearly meant that one bridge wasn't safe, and to take it would lead to death at the hands of either the harpies or the trolls themselves, or, assuming both parties failed to act quickly enough, by falling a very long distance and landing hard on the ground below. Actually, David thought that both bridges looked pretty ramshackle, but he had to assume that the riddle had some truth to it. Otherwise, well, there was hardly any point in having a riddle at all. One lies in truth, one's truth is lies. David knew that one. He'd encountered it somewhere before, probably in a story. Oh, he had. One could only tell lies, and the other could only tell truths. So, you could ask one troll which bridge to follow, but he or she, and David wasn't entirely sure if the trolls were male or female, might not be telling the truth. There was a solution to it as well, except that David couldn't remember it. What was it? The light faded entirely at last, and a great howling arose from the forest. It sounded very close. "We have to cross," said the woodsman. "The wolves have found our trail." "We can't cross until we've chosen a bridge," explained David. "I don't think those trolls will let us pass unless we do, and if we force our way through and choose the wrong one, then we won't have to worry about the wolves," the woodsman said, finishing the sentence for him. "There's a solution," said David. "I know there is. I just have to remember how it goes." They heard a thrashing in the woods. The wolves were drawing ever nearer. "One question," muttered David. The woodsman hefted his axe in his right hand, and with his left drew the knife. He was facing the line of trees, ready to take on whatever emerged from the woods. "Got it," said David. "I think," he added, softly. He approached the troll on the left. It was slightly taller than the other, and smelled slightly better, which wasn't saying much. David took a deep breath. If I asked the other troll to point to the right bridge, which bridge would it choose? There was silence. The troll knit its brow, causing some of the sores upon its face to ooze unpleasantly. David didn't know how recently the bridge had been constructed, or how many other travellers had passed this way, but he got the feeling the troll had never been asked that question before. Finally, the troll seemed to give up on trying to understand David's logic, and pointed to the one on its left. "It's the one on the right," said David to the woodsman. "How can you be sure?" "Because if the troll I asked is a liar, then the other troll is a truth-teller. The truth-teller would point to the correct bridge, but the liar would lie about it. So if the truthful one would have pointed to the bridge on the right, then the liar would lie about it and tell me that it was the one on the left. But if the troll I asked has to tell the truth, then the other is the liar. He would point to the wrong bridge. Either way, the one on the left is the false bridge." That's actually sound logic. Despite the approach of wolves, the presence of the bewildered trolls, and the shrieking of the harpies, David couldn't help but grin with pleasure. He'd remembered the riddle and recalled the solution. It was like the woodsman had said. Someone was trying to create a story, and David was a part of it. But the story was itself made up of other stories. David had read about trolls and harpies, and lots of old stories had woodsmen in them, even talking animals, like the wolves cropped up in them. "Come on," said David to the woodsman. He approached the bridge on the right, and the troll standing before it stepped to one side to allow David to pass. David put a foot on the first of the boards and held on tight to the ropes. Now that his life depended on the choice, he felt a little less certain of himself, and the sight of the harpies gliding just beneath his feet made him even more anxious. Still, he had chosen now, and there was no going back. He took a second step, then another, always keeping a grip on the rope supports and trying not to look down. He was making good progress when he realized that the woodsman was not following. David stopped on the bridge and looked back. The forest was alive with wolf eyes. David could see them shining in the torchlight. Now they were moving, emerging from the shadows, advancing slowly on the woodsman. The more primitive ones leading, the others, the loops, staying back, waiting for the lesser brothers and sisters to overpower the armed man before they approached. The trolls had vanished, clearly realizing there was little point in discussing riddles with wild animals. "No!" cried David. "Come on, you can make it!" But the woodsman did not move. Instead, he called out to David, "Go now, and go quickly. I will hold them off for as long as I can. When you get to the other side, cut the ropes. Do you hear me? Cut the ropes." David shook his head. "No!" he repeated. He was crying. "You have to come with me. I need you to come with me." And then, almost as one, the wolves pounced. "Run!" shouted the woodsman, as his axe swung and his knife flashed. David saw a fine spray of blood fountain into the air as the first wolf died. Then they were all around the woodsman, snapping and biting, some trying to find a way past him to pursue the boy. With one last look over his shoulder, David ran. He was still not quite halfway across the bridge, and it swung sickeningly with each movement that he made. The pounding of his feet echoed through the gorge. Soon it was joined by the sound of paws on wood. David looked to his left and saw that 3 of his pursuers had taken the other bridge in hope of cutting him off on the far side, but they could not find a way around the woodsman who was guarding the first bridge. The creatures were gaining ground quickly. One of them, a loop, bringing up the rear, wore the remains of a white dress, and droplets of gold dangled from its ears. Saliva dripped from its jaws as it ran, and it licked at it with its tongue. "Run," it said in a voice that was almost girlish. "For all the good that will do you," it snapped at the air. "You'll taste just as good on the other side." David's arms ached from holding onto the ropes, and the swaying of the bridge made him feel dizzy. The walls were already almost level with him. He would never make it to the other side before they did. And some of the slats on the full spin bridge collapsed, and the lead wolf plunged through the hole. David heard the whistling of a harpoon, and the wolf was speared through its belly and yanked towards the trolls in the canyon wall. The other wolf stopped in its tracks so suddenly that the female loop almost knocked it over from behind. A great hole, 6 or 7 feet wide at least, now gaped where their brother had broken through. More harpoons shot across the gap, for the trolls were no longer prepared to wait for their prey to fall. The wolves had set foot on the wrong bridge, and in doing so had doomed themselves. Another barbed blade found its mark, and the second wolf was pulled through the gaps in the ropes, writhing in torment upon the steel as it died. Now only the loop remained. It tensed its body and leaped across the gap in the bridge, landing safely on the other side. It slid for a moment, then recovered itself before it rose on its hind legs, and now out of range of the troll's weapon, howled in triumph, even as a shadow descended upon it. The harpy was larger than any of the others that David had seen, taller and stronger and more ancient than the rest. It hit the loop with enough force to send it toppling over the support ropes, and only the firm grasp of the harpy's claws, which had buried themselves deep in the loop's flesh as they struck, prevented it from tumbling to its death. The loop's paws flailed and its jaws snapped at empty space as it tried to bite the harpy, but the fight was already lost. As David watched in horror, a second harpy joined the first, sinking its claws into the loop's necks. The 2 monstrous females pulled in opposite directions, their wings beating rapidly, and the loop was torn in 2. The woodsman was still trying to hold back the pack, but he was fighting a losing battle. David saw him slash and cut again and again what seemed like a moving wall of fur and fangs, until finally he fell and the wolves descended upon him. "No!" he cried, as though "No! Not the woodsman!" cried David, and although he was overcome by rage and sadness, he somehow found it in himself to begin running again. Even as he saw 2 loops leap over the woodsman's body to lead a pair of wolves onto the bridge, he could hear their paws rattling the struts, and the weight of their bodies made the bridge sway. David reached the far side of the chasm, drew his sword, and faced the approaching animals. They were now more than halfway across, and closing fast. The 4 support ropes of the bridge were fixed to a pair of thick poles set deep into the stone beneath David's feet. David took his sword and swung at the first of the ropes. Cutting about halfway through, he struck again, and the rope shot away, causing the bridge to topple suddenly to the right and sending the 2 wolves into the canyon. David heard the harpies cry with delight, and the beating of their wings grew louder. There were still 2 loops on the bridge, and they had somehow managed to hook their limber paws around the remaining support rope. Now standing on their 2 hind legs, and keeping the ropes to the left, they were continuing to close on David. He brought his sword down on the second rope. He heard the loops bay in alarm. The bridge shook, and strands unravelled beneath his blade. He laid the sword edge on the rope, looked to the loops, then raised his arms, and slashed with all the force that he could muster. The rope broke, and now there was nothing for the loops to hold on to, and only the wooden slats of the bridge beneath their feet. With loud yelps, they fell. David stared over at the far side of the chasm. The woodsman was gone. There was a trail of blood on the ground where he had been dragged into the forest by the wolves. Now only their leader, the dandy Leroy, remained. He stood upright in his red trousers and white shirt, staring at David with undisguised hatred. He raised his head and howled for the lost members of his pack, but he didn't leave. Instead, he continued to watch David until the boy at last left the bridge and disappeared over a small rise, crying softly for the woodsman who had saved his life. Okay, we're at my favourite chapter. Chapter 14 of Dwarves and their sometimes irascible nature. David was on a raised white road, paved with gravel and stones. It was not straight, but wound according to the obstacles it encountered. A small stream here, a rocky outcrop there, a ditch ran along each side, and from there an area of weed and grass led to the tree line. The trees were smaller and more scattered than in the forest he had recently left, but he could see the outlines of small, rocky hills rising beyond them. He was suddenly very tired. Now that the chase was over, all of his energy was gone. He wanted very badly just to fall asleep, but he was afraid to do so out in the open or to remain too close to the chasm. He needed to find shelter. The wolves would not forgive him for what had happened at the bridges. They would find another way to cross, and then they would seek out his trail once again. Instinctively, he raised his eyes to the sky, but he could see no birds following his path from above, no traitorous ravens waiting to reveal his presence to the hunters at his back. To give himself some energy, he ate a little bread from his bag and drank deeply from his water. It made him feel better for a moment, but the sight of the bag and the carefully packed food reminded him of the woodsman. His eyes grew teary again, but he refused to allow himself the luxury of crying. He got to his feet, put his pack on his shoulder, and almost fell over a dwarf who had just climbed up on the road from the low ditch on the left. "Mind where you're going," said the dwarf. He was about 3 feet tall, and wore a blue tunic, black trousers, and black boots that came up to his knees. There was a long blue hat on his head, at the end of which was a little bell that no longer made any sound. His face and hands were grubby with dirt, and he carried a pickaxe over one shoulder. His nose was quite red, and he had a short white beard. The beard appeared to have pieces of food trapped in it. "Sorry," said David. "So you should be. I didn't see you." "Oh, and what's that supposed to mean?" said the dwarf. He waved his pick threateningly. "Are you sizist? Are you trying to say I'm small?" "Well, you are small," said David. "Not that there's anything wrong with that," he added hurriedly. "I'm small too, compared to some people." But the dwarf was no longer listening, and had instead commenced shouting at a column of squat figures heading for the road. "Oi, comrades," said the dwarf, Bloke over here says I'm small. Bloody cheek, said a voice. Hold him till we get there, comrade, said another, who then appeared to reconsider. Hang on, how big is he? The dwarf examined David. Not very big, he said. Dwarf and a half, dwarf and 2/3 at most. Righty, we'll have him, came the reply. Suddenly it seemed as if David was surrounded by short unhappy men muttering about rights and liberties and having enough of this sort of thing. They were all filthy, and they all wore hats with broken belts. One of them kicked David in the shin. Ow, said David. That hurt. Now you know how our feelings feel, said the first dwarf. A small grubby hand tugged at David's bag, another tried to steal his sword, a third appeared to be poking me in soft places just for the fun of it. That's enough, shouted David. Stop it. He swung his pack wildly and was rather pleased to feel it connect with a pair of dwarves, who immediately fell into the ditch and rolled around theatrically for some time. What did you do that for? Asked the first dwarf. He looked quite shocked. You were kicking me. Was not. Was so too when someone tried to steal my bag. Did not. Oh, this is just ridiculous, said David. You did and you know it. The dwarf lowered his head and kicked lightly at the road, sending a little puff of white dust into the air. Oh, all right then, it said. Maybe I did. Sorry. That's all right, said David. He reached down and helped the dwarves raise their two fellows from the ditch. Nobody was badly hurt. In fact, now that it was all over, the dwarves seemed to rather have enjoyed the whole encounter. Reminder of the great struggle that was, said one. Right, comrade? Absolutely, comrade, replied another. The workers must resist oppression at every turn. But I wasn't really oppressing you, said David. But you could have if you wanted to, said the first dwarf. Right? He looked up at David quite pathetically, and David could tell that he really, really would have liked someone to try and successfully try to oppress him. Well, if you say so, said David, just to make the dwarf happy. Hurrah! Shouted the dwarf. We have resisted the threat of oppression. The workers will not be shackled. Hurrah! Shouted the other dwarfs in unison. We have nothing to lose but our chains. But you don't have any chains, said David. They're metaphorical chains, explained the first dwarf. He nodded once, as if he'd just said something very profound. Right, said David. He wasn't certain what a metaphorical chain was exactly. In fact, David wasn't entirely sure what the dwarves were talking about at all. Still, there were 7 of them altogether, which seemed about right. Do you have names? Asked David. Names? Said the first dwarf. Names? Of course we have names. He gave a little self-important cough. I'm comrade brother number 1. These are comrade brothers numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8. What happened to 7? Asked David. There was an embarrassed silence. We don't talk about former comrade brother number 7, said comrade brother number 1 eventually. He has been officially excised from the party's records. He went to work for his mum, explained comrade brother number 3 helpfully. A capitalist, spat brother number 1. A baker, brother number 3 corrected him. He stood on his tiptoes and whispered to David. We're not allowed to talk to him now. We can't even eat his mum's buns, not even the day-old ones that she sells for half price. I heard that, said brother number 1. We can make our own buns, he added huffily. Don't need buns made by a class traitor. No, we can't, said brother number 3. They're always hard, and then she complains. Instantly, the dwarf's relatively good humour disappeared. They picked up their tools and prepared to leave. Got to be on our way, said brother number 1. Pleasure to have met you, comrade. You are a comrade, aren't you? I suppose so, said David. He wasn't sure, but he wasn't about to risk getting into another fight with the dwarves. Can I still eat buns if I'm not a comrade? As long as they're not baked by former comrade brother number 7. Or his mum. Or his mum, said brother number 3 sarcastically. You can eat anything you like, concluded brother number 1, as he raised a finger of warning to brother number 3. The dwarf started marching back down the ditch on the other side of the road, following a rough trail that led into the trees. Excuse me, said David. I don't suppose I could stay with you for the night, could I? I'm lost and very tired. Comrade brother number 1 paused. She won't like it, said brother number 4. Then again, said brother number 2. She's always complaining she has nobody to talk to. Might put her in a good mood to see a new face. A good mood, said brother number one wistfully, as though it was a wonderful flavour of ice cream that he'd tasted a long, long time ago. Right you are, comrade, he said to David. Come with us, we'll see you straight. David was so happy he could have skipped. While they walked, David learned a little more about the dwarves. At least he thought that he might be learning more about them, but didn't quite catch everything he was being told. There was a lot of talk about workers' ownership of the methods of production, and the principle of the Second Congress of the Third Committee, but not the Third Congress of the Second Committee, which had apparently ended in a fight over who was going to wash the cups afterwards. David had some idea of who she might be as well, but it seemed polite to check just in case. Does a lady live with you? He asked brother number one. The buzz of conversation from the other dwarfs instantly ceased. Yes, unfortunately, said brother number one. All 7 of you, David continued. He wasn't sure why, but there was something slightly odd about a woman who lived with 7 little men. Separate beds, said the dwarfs. No funny business. Gosh, no, said David. He tried to wonder what funny business the dwarf could be referring to, then decided it might not be better not to think about it. Her name wouldn't be Snow White, would it? Comrade brother number one stopped suddenly, causing a minor pile-up of comrades behind him. She's not a friend of yours, is she? He asked suspiciously. Oh no, not at all, said David. I never met the lady. I might have heard about her, that's all. Huh, said the dwarf, apparently satisfied, and started walking again. Everybody has heard of her. Ooh, Snow White who lives with the dwarves, eats them out of house and home. They couldn't even kill her, right? Oh yes, everybody knows about Snow White. Kill her? Asked David. Poisoned apple, said the dwarf. Didn't go too well. We underestimated the dose. I thought it was her wicked stepmother who poisoned her, said David. You'll read the papers, said the dwarf. Turned out the wicked stepmother had an alibi. We should have really checked first, said brother number 5. Seems she was off poisoning someone else at the time. Chancing a million, really. It was just bad luck. Now it was David's turn to pause. So you mean you tried to poison Snow White? We just wanted it to nod off for a while, said brother number 2. A very long while, said number 3. But why? Said David. You'll see, said brother number 1. Anyway, we feed her an apple, chomp chomp, snooze snooze, weep weep. Poor Snow White will miss her so, but life goes on. We'll lay her out on a slab, surround her with flowers and little weeping bunny rabbits, all the trimmings, and have a bloody prince. All the trimmings. And then along comes a bloody prince and kisses her. We don't even have a prince around here. He just appeared out of nowhere on a bleeding white horse. Next thing you know, he's climbed off and he's on to Snow White like a whippet down a rabbit hole. Don't know why he thought what he thought he was doing, gadding about randomly kissing strange women who happened to be sleeping at the time. Pervert, said brother number 3. Ought to be locked up. Anyway, so he pounces in on his white horse like a big perfumed tea cozy, getting involved in affairs that are none of his business, and the next thing you know, she wakes up and oh, was she in a bad mood. The prince didn't half get an earful, and that was after she clocked him one first for taking liberties. 5 minutes of listening to that, and instead of marrying her, the prince gets back on his horse and rides off into the sunset. Never saw him again. We blame the local wicked stepmother for the whole apple business, but well, there's a lesson to be learned from all this. It's to make sure that the person you're going to wrongfully blame for doing something bad is actually available for selection, as it were. There was a trial. They got suspended sentences on the grounds of provocation combined with lack of sufficient evidence, and we were told that if anything ever happened to Snow White again, if she chipped a nail, we'd be for it. Comrade brother number 1 did an impression of choking on a noose, just in case David didn't understand what it meant. Oh, said David. But that's not the story I heard. Story, the dwarf snorted. You'll be talking about happily ever after next. Do we look happy? There's no happily ever after for us. Miserably ever after, more like it. We should have left it for the bears, said brother number 5 glumly. They know how to do a good killing to the bears. Goldilocks, said brother number 1, nodding approvingly. Classic that. Just classic. Oh, she was awful, said brother number 5. You couldn't blame them, really. Hang on, said David. Goldilocks ran away from the bear's house and never went back there again. He stopped talking. The dwarves were now looking at him as if he might have been a little slow. Didn't she? He added. She got a taste for their porridge, said brother number one, tapping the side of his nose gently as though he were confiding a great secret to David. Couldn't get enough of it. Eventually, the bears just got tired of her and, well, that was that. She ran away into the woods and never went back to the bear's house again. A likely story. You mean they killed her? Asked David. They ate her, said brother number one. With porridge. That's what ran away and was never seen again means in these parts. It means eaten. And, what about happily ever after? Asked David, a little uncertainly. What does that mean? Eaten quickly, said brother number one. And with that they reached the dwarf's house. We do love the dwarfs. Chapter 14 of Snow White, who is very unpleasant indeed. You're late. David's eardrums rang like bells as comrade brother number one opened the front door of the cottage and cried, very nervously, "Kai, we're home!" in that sing-song voice that David's father had sometimes used on David's mother when he got back late from the pub and knew he was in trouble. "Don't we're home me," came the reply. "Where have you been? I'm starving. Me stomach's like an empty barrel." David had never heard a voice quite like it. It was a woman's voice, but it managed to be both deep and high at the same time, just like those huge trenches that were supposed to lie at the bottom of the ocean, only not quite so wet. "Ooh, I can hear it rumbling," said the voice. "Here, you listen to it." A big white hand reached out and grabbed brother number one by the scruff of his neck, lifting him off his feet and yanking him inside. "Oh, yep," said the brother number one. After a moment or two, his voice sounded slightly muffled. "I can hear it now." David allowed the other dwarfs to enter the cottage ahead of him. They walked like prisoners who had just been told that the executioner had a little extra time on his hands and could fit in a few more beheadings before he went home for his tea. David cast a lingering glance back at the dark forest and wondered if he shouldn't just take his chances outside. "Close that door," said the voice. "I'm freezing, my teeth are chattering." David, feeling that he had no other choice, stepped into the cottage and closed the door firmly behind him. Standing before him was the biggest, fattest lady that David had ever seen. Her face was caked with white makeup, her hair was black, held back by a brightly coloured cotton band, her lips were painted purple, she wore a pink dress large enough to house a small circus. Brother number one was pressed hard against its fold, the better to hear the strange noises that the great stomach beneath was currently making. His little feet almost, but not quite, touched the ground. The dress was decorated with so many ribbons and buttons and bows that David was quite at a loss as to how the lady could remember which ones actually released her from the dress and which were merely for show. Her feet were squashed into a pair of silk slippers that were at least 3 sizes too small, and the rings on her fingers were almost lost in her flesh. "Who are you, then?" she said. "He's company," said brother number one. "Company?" said the lady, dropping brother number one like an unwanted toy. "Well, why didn't you say you were bringing company?" She patted her hair and smiled, exposing lipstick smeared teeth. "I'd have dressed up, I'd have put me face on." David heard brother number 3 whisper to brother number 8. The words "anything" and "improvement" were barely audible. Unfortunately, they were still too loud for the lady's liking, and brother number 3 received a smack across the head for the trouble. "Careful," she said. "Cheeky sod." She then extended a large pale hand towards David and gave a little curtsy. "Snow White," she said. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, I'm sure." David shook hands and watched with alarm as his fingers were swallowed up in Snow White's marshmallow palm. David, he said. That's a nice name, said Snow White. She giggled and buried her chin in her chest. The action created so many ripples of fat that her head looked like as if it was melting. Are you a prince? No, said David. Sorry. Snow White looked disappointed. She released David's hand and tried to play with one of her rings, but the ring was so tight that it wouldn't budge. A nobleman, maybe? No. A son of a nobleman with a great inheritance waiting for you on your 18th birthday? David pretended to think about the question. No again, he said. But what are you then? Don't tell me you're another one of their boring friends come here to talk about workers and oppression. I warned them, I did. No more talk about revolutions, not until I've had me tea. But we are oppressed, protested brother number one. Of course you're oppressed, said Snow White. You're only 3 feet tall. Now go get me tea started before I lose me good humour, and take your boots off. I don't want you not putting muck on me nice clean floor. You only cleaned it yesterday. The dwarves removed their boots and left them at the door along with their tools, then queued to wash their hands in the little sink before preparing the evening meal. They sliced bread and cut vegetables, while 2 rabbits roasted over the open fire. The smell made David's mouth water. I suppose you'll be wanting food and all, said Snow White to David. I am rather hungry, David admitted. Well, you can share there, Rabbit. You ain't having any of mine. Snow White plopped herself down in a big chair by the fire. She puffed her cheeks and sighed loudly. I hate it here, she said. It's so boring. Why don't you just leave? Asked David. Leave, said Snow White. Where would I leave to? Don't you have a home? Said David. My dad and stepmom moved away. They said their place is too small for me. Anyway, they're just boring, and I'd rather be bored here than bored with them. Oh, said David. He wondered if he should bring up the subject of the court case with the dwarf's attempt to poison Snow White. He was very interested in it, but he wasn't sure that it would be polite to ask. After all, he didn't want to get the dwarfs into any more trouble than they were already in. In the end, Snow White made the decision for him. She leaned forward and whispered in a voice like 2 rocks rubbing together. Anyway, they have to look after me. Judge told them to. Judge told them they had to on account of how they tried to poison me. David didn't think he'd want to live with someone who had already tried to kill him once, but I suppose that Snow White wasn't worried about the dwarf trying again. If they did, they'd be killed, although the look on brother number one's face made David suspect that death might almost be welcomed after living with Snow White for a while. But don't you want to meet a handsome prince? He asked. I've met a handsome prince, said Snow White. She stared dreamily out the window. He woke me with a kiss, but then he had to leave. He told me he'd be back, though, once he'd gone off and killed some dragon or other. Should have stayed here and taken care of the one we have first, muttered brother number 3. Snow White threw a log at him. See what I have to put up with, she said to David. I'm left alone all day while they worked out mine, and then I have to listen to them complain as soon as they get home. I don't even know why they bother with all that mining. They never seem to find anything. David saw the dwarves exchange some looks when they heard Snow White was saying. He even thought he heard brother number 3 give a little laugh until brother number 4 kicked him in the shin and told him to be quiet. So I'm going to stay here with this lot until my prince returns, said Snow White. Until another prince comes along and decides to marry me, whichever happens first. She put a hangnail from her little finger, chewed it for a moment, then spat it into the fire. Now, she said, bringing the subject to a close, where's me tea? Every cup, pot, pan, and plate in the cottage rattled. Dust fell from the ceiling. David saw a family of mice evacuate their mouse hole and leave through a crack in the wall, never to return. I always get a bit shouty when I'm hungry, mate, said Snow White. Right, someone hand me that rabbit. They ate in silence, apart from the slurping, scraping, and chewing and belching coming from Snow White's end of the table. She really did eat not a lot. She stripped her own rabbit from bones, then began picking meat from brother number 6's plates, without even a by your leave. She devoured an entire loaf of bread and half a block of very spilly cheese. She drank tankard after tankard of the ale the dwarfs brewed in their shed, and polished it all off with 2 chunks of fruit cake baked by brother number 1, although she complained when the raisin chipped one of her teeth. Told you it was a bit dry, whispered brother number 2 to brother number 1. Brother number 1 just scowled. Once there was nothing left to eat, Snow White staggered from the table and flopped down in her chair by the fire, where she instantly fell asleep. David helped the dwarves to clear the table and wash the dishes, then joined them in the corner when they all began smoking pipes. The tobacco reeked as if someone was burning old damp socks. Brother number 1 offered to share his pipe with David, but David very politely declined the offer. "What do you mind?" he asked. There was some coughing from a number of the dwarves, and David noticed that none of them wanted to catch his eye. Only brother number 1 seemed willing to try to answer the question. "Coal, sort of," he said. "Sort of. Well, it's a kind of coal. It's stuff that used to be sort of in a way coal. It's coal-ish," said brother number 3 helpfully. David considered this. "Do you mean diamonds?" 7 small figures instantly leaped on him. Brother number 1 covered David's mouth with a little hand and said, "Don't say that word in here. Ever." David nodded. Once the dwarves were sure that he understood the gravity of the situation, they climbed off him again. "So you haven't told Snow White about the coalish stuff?" "No," said brother number 1. "Never. Quite got round to it." "Don't you trust her?" "Would you?" said brother number 3. Last winter, when food was hard to come by, brother number 4 woke up to find her nibbling his foot. Nibbling his foot. Brother number 4 nodded sullenly to let David know that this was nothing less than the truth. "Still have the marks," he said. "If she found out the mine was working, she'd take us for every gem we're worth," continued brother number 3. "Then we'd be even more oppressed than we already are, and poorer." David looked round the cottage. It really wasn't very much to write home about. There were 2 rooms, the one in which they sat now, a bedroom that Snow White had taken for her own. The dwarves slept together in one bed at the corner beside the fire, 3 at one end and 4 at the other. "If she wasn't around, we could do the place up a bit," said brother number 1. "But if we start spending money on it, then she'll get suspicious. So we have to keep it the way it is. We can't even buy another bed." "But aren't there people nearby who know about the mine? Doesn't anybody suspect?" "Oh, we've always let people know that we make a little from mining," said the dwarf. "Just enough to keep us going. It's hard work, mining. Nobody wants to do it unless they're sure of getting wealthy from it. As long as we keep our heads down and don't go wild spending money on fancy clothes or gold chains or beds," said brother number 8. "Or beds," agreed brother number 1. "And everything will be fine. Just that none of us is getting any younger, and now it'd be nice to take things a bit easier, perhaps treat ourselves to some luxuries." The dwarves looked at Snow White snoring in her chair, and all of them sighed as one. "Actually, we're hoping to bribe someone to take her off our hands," admitted brother number 1 at last. "You mean pay someone to marry her?" asked David. "He'd have to be really desperate, of course, but we'd make it worth his while," said brother number 1. "Well, I'm not sure there are enough diamonds in the whole land to make living with her worthwhile, but we'd give him a pile to ease the burden. Could buy some really nice earplugs and a really big bed." And a really big bed. By now, some of the dwarves were nodding off. Brother number 1 took a long stick and nervously approached Snow White. "She doesn't like being woken up," he explained to David. "We find this is the easiest for everyone." He poked at Snow White with the end of the stick. Nothing happened. "I think you'll have to do it harder," said David. This time the dwarf gave her a good, strong prod. It seemed to work, because she instantly grabbed the stick and gave it a sharp tug, almost flicking brother number 1 straight into the fireplace before he remembered to let go and landed in the coal scuttle instead. "Ugh," said Snow White. "Ugh." She wiped some drool from her mouth, rose from her chair, staggered to her bedroom. "Bacon in the morning," she said. 4 eggs and a sausage. No, make that 8 sausages. With that, she slammed the door behind her, fell on her bed, and was immediately sound asleep. David sat, curled up in the chair by the fire. The house rumbled with the snoring of Snow White and the dwarves, a complex arrangement of snorts, whistles, and dusty coughs. David thought of the woodsman, and the trail of blood leading into the woods. He remembered Leroy, and the look in the Loop's eyes. David knew that he could not afford to remain with the dwarves for longer than one night. He had to keep moving. He had to find the king. He got up from his chair and walked to the window. He could see nothing outside, so thick and heavy was the darkness. He listened, but he could only hear the hooting of an owl. He had not forgotten what had brought him to this place, but his mother's voice had not come to him again since he had entered the new world. Only if she called to him would he be able to find her. "Mom," he whispered, "if you're out there, I need your help. I can't find you if you don't guide me." But there was no reply. He went back to his chair and closed his eyes. He fell asleep and dreamed of his bedroom at home, and of his father and his new family, but they were not alone in the house. In his dream, the crooked man stalked the hallway until he came to George's bedroom, where he stood for a long time looking at the child before departing the house and returning to his own world. And we're at chapter 15. And I tend to read 5 chapters every time that I do this. I tend to notice that there's a lot more people here by the time that I'm finished reading the book than when I've started to read the book. So I might actually start doing these streams at 11 o'clock instead of 9, to make it a bit easier for the later viewers to come in and actually catch the full book. I also really do like this chapter though. Actually, the next reading session is going to be very fun because I really like the middle of this book. It's when things start to get a bit more fun. That might be a better time for most, yeah. It also means that you're already on the bus. I believe you mentioned that you get the bus at like 11, 12 o'clock, something like that. It also means I get to have a lion. The problem is, of course, that my partner also streams over at wolf_imperial, where the O is actually a 0, the number. And he generally gets up at about 1 o'clock, maybe sometimes a bit earlier, depending. And I am a little bit worried that if I do these reading streams a bit later, it means that he won't be able to stick to his schedule. So I tend to do my streams a bit earlier in the morning, so that when he wakes up, I'm doing nothing. So he can just get on and do his own streams. And yeah, because I'm thoughtful like that, you know? And then like of an evening, I'll do a silent stream because he streams from like 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon up until like 3 o'clock in the morning, basically, when I'm in bed, until he gets super, super tired and actually has to go to sleep. But yeah, I'll actually start doing this. I'll starting it on 11. I'll probably still end up waking up at like 9, 10 o'clock in the morning so I can have breakfast and then I can just set everything up and start. But next time I'll be doing this at like actually 11 o'clock for me. I don't know what time it is for you guys, but like around this time, wherever it may be for you in the world. Let's have a look at my little schedule. Ooh, I can do another one on Saturday. Yes, there he is. There is my boy. I'd rate him, but he's not on right now. If you like watching Dead by Daylight or people getting angry at video games because people are bad to him during video games, then by all means go follow him, because when I'm not streaming, he'll be streaming, and he could do with more people just being over there. He's trying to do this as a full-time job. I'm doing this for the funsies of it. You know, if I grow, I grow. If I don't, I don't. That's fine. But he needs the help. And rants. He likes doing rants too. He's very, very engaging as a person, because you could go into his chat and go, "Hey, what do you think about Unbreakable?" and he will go on like a 5 to 10 minute rant about the perk Unbreakable, and it is extremely fun. He gets so passionate about it. He really does. He's very passionate about all the things that he does. So, if you want to go over to him, and give him a little follow, that would be very cool. If there's any new viewers that are currently watching, if you'd like to give me a follow, I would also appreciate that too. And also, I have a cute little thing that pops up when people follow me. So if you want to see the little cute thing that pops up, please follow. You don't have to stay followed. It's just if you want to see the cute little thing. Yes. Wolf is in fact a bard. He claims he's a warlock. He did play warlock. He claims that he is many different things, but we all know that he's a bard. He has a background in performing arts. He has a maxed out charisma stat. He's a bard. He'll never admit it. He will never admit that he's a bard. But you guys could absolutely go over there and be like, by the way, you're a bard. And he will... He will. He will claim it's bull. But no, he's a bard. He's in denial of being a bard. I need to make a little raid emote too for when people come in and raid me. I don't get raided very often, but when I do, it's always a nice little fun thing, and I need to make a little raiding thing. I made my own follow gif, however you say it, of a little slime, because I'm a huge fan of slime. Like, I'm described as a slime mouse. But obviously drawing a slime mouse is very difficult for a lot of people, so I've kept my icon very, very simple. Because having simple iconography means people recognise you, and there aren't a lot of mice personas out there who wear a very, very big jumper. Or sweater, if you're American. I'm probably gonna have to cut off like a lot of the preamble of this stream, but if people enjoy it, people enjoy it. In the meantime, I'm just gonna have a chat with you guys. Because why not? Haha. Because we do love ourselves a chat stream. Oh, I should come back to bed. Oh, I also love a chat. I'm also trying to keep myself awake for my parcel. Guaranteed, this is the parcel that'll come at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I will be so upset. I will be ungodly amounts of upset. Just you wait. I wonder if anyone else is like online right now. I know Rookster is, because Rookster came in and gave me a look, which I'm always happy about. No, even Rook isn't on. Even Rockstar isn't on. Oh wow, I'm like the only person alive right now, like in my little network of people. That's interesting. I mean, they all come on like they all come on like a lot later on in the day. I think I'm the only one out of my little group of people that actually streams this early in the morning. Everyone else streams late into the night, into the early morning, and then I get up and do a little stream really early in the morning. But I'll start doing it around this time, maybe 30 minutes ago ish, just to pick up on some of the lovely people who wake up a bit later. You know, because I don't want to rely on my VODs for people to listen to the books that I'm reading. It's always nice to make the blunders in real time, you know? It's more fun. Unless you count 2 AM random wolf streams. Yes. And 2 AM random Hollowed Wolf streams. I know 2 people that are named Wolf now. So I have to call one hollowed and one imperial when they're interacting with each other. But wolf will always be wolf to me. Like wolf imperial is always wolf to me. You know. So, yeah. If I'm not on throughout the day, by all means, please go over to Wolf Imperial, because he's fun, especially if you like ranty stuff. I'll stop playing on my phone case. And yeah, I normally end up doing a silent stream much later on in the day at around maybe 8 o'clock UK time. Used to be a wolf too. That's like 3 wolves I know. How dare. I mean, technically, at one point I was also a wolf, but that was mostly because in Moonbase, I think it was called. I don't remember the exact name of it, but like there used to be a game where you would be little astronauts on a moon, and there was a very tiny Earth, and you could like jump and fly around and stuff. And there was various different servers, and one of the servers was like a letter. I think it was N. I think it was room N that we all used to hang around in. And there was like a little group of wolves. One of them was called Biscuit Wolf, and from a young age that taught me how to spell biscuit. So thank you, Biscuit Wolf, wherever you are in the world right now. There was quite a lot of people from that time that I remember very fondly that I lost touch with like ages and ages and ages and ages ago. I hope they're all doing well, you know when you meet people and like you haven't spoken to them in like forever because you all kind of grew up and you like left, but like you never forget them because they were like such a huge part of your life. Yeah. The wolves people and the people of Moonbase were just so fun. On the same website there was another one that was like an RPG game. It was like an MMORPG, but it was very, very bare bones. There was giant spiders. Yeah, Biscuit. Biscuit. Yeah, Biscuit is very annoying to spell, but Biscuit Wolf helped me. On account of their name being Biscuit Wolf, you know? And yeah, I went by a much different name back then. I only started really adopting mouse into my persona when I got my first mouse, which was an albino mouse, a lab mouse, called Shiver. And he was the most well-behaved mouse. In fact, he was the most well-behaved pet, like, period, that I'd ever had. Because at first I used to keep him in a cage, and then I realised that a cage was a bit too much, and I couldn't really clean it all the time, because I was, So I used to keep him in a tray. I used to keep this mouse in a tray, and he was like on our landing. We have like a little storage cabinet, and he used to be on there because my room was like right next to it. And I remember coming out like in my dressing gown or whatever, and I would pick him up. He would wait on top of his little house. I got him a little plastic house, and he would sit on top of that and wait for me to come out. He'd hear me waking up, and he'd come out. He'd sit on top of it, and he'd wait for me to come out, and I'd just take him around the house all day. And then at one point, I remember moving him into my room in like a shoebox. I put all this stuff in like a shoebox, and he'd run out of food. I didn't realize it at the time, but he crawled out of his box, which demonstrates that at any point he could escape. Like he could have just ran away, but he didn't. He got out of his box. He walked all the way across my bed. and found the area between like my cheek, my chin, and my hands, and nuzzled me awake. And I was like, I remember waking up and going, what the heck? And like looking down and seeing my mouse and just seeing Shiver just like cuddled up to me and being like, what are you doing here? What? So I got up and I put him back in and I went back to bed, and then I heard him, trying to climb out again, and I was like, oh, he's not gonna go to sleep, is he? So I booped him back in, and I waited for it again, and I booped him back in. And I went, okay, you're trying to escape, so obviously something's up. You've got my attention, what is it? I opened it up, found out he had no food. I went, you have no food. So I put some food in, I closed it over, I went to bed, he ate, and he never bothered me for the rest of the night. He was perfectly fine. He like, all he wanted was food. He was like, I'm hungry, please feed. And yeah, it was so good. It was so fun. I loved that mouse with all my heart. Yeah, he, at one point, actually, when he was on the tray outside, like when I put him back in the tray, outside of my room, my mum found him in the entrance to my room on the floor looking around for me. And so she was like, okay. She picked him up, put him back in, gave him some food, and just stayed in there the entire day. He was such a good mouse. I mean, yeah, you can yeah, same thing with Imperial. I made him like I cooked his dinner last night. Feed him, give him coffee, he's happy. Yep. He wakes up in the morning and he like rolls over and he'll be like, coffee, please. And I'm like, alright. So I make him a coffee. But yeah, I really like that mouse. And since then, like, mice just skyrocketed to being my favourite animals because of that one mouse when I was a kid. I wish I could keep doing that, but it wasn't too bad when I was at school because I could take off my pajamas and wash and then go to school or whatever. But like, it's so much difficult managing pets when you're an adult, because it's like, oh yeah, I have to play with my mice and the hamster, but I also have to do the laundry and do the dishes and clean up and all the other stuff, and I get overwhelmed super easy. Mice are amazing. If you've never had pet mice before, I would highly recommend getting female mice. One male mouse. Only one male mouse or like 2 to 3 female mice, because female mice are social and they will die of loneliness. Please not only get just one female mouse, get like a couple, or if not more, because they're very social. They will fight between them because they're trying to figure out the hierarchy, so you may hear them squeaking at each other in the night and you're like, can you two stop fighting, please, I'm begging you. But if you're going to get male mice, get one, because they are extremely territorial and they will fight to the death. Same for rats. Rats are very social. Don't just get one rat, get like 3. Same for ferrets. Never get one ferret, get a bunch of ferrets. They're all very social animals. They all like being around others of the same thing. Basically, generally speaking, if you're going to get a pet, never just get one of that pet. Because, when you have people that you can talk to, because we can understand each other as people, but your animal doesn't have, the same thing. They can kind of understand you, but if you have a small dog, getting another small dog, they can now play and they understand each other and all that stuff. Some animals are very like not social though, like male mice, and I can't think of another one. When our pets pass away, because as much as I don't want to think about them passing away, it's still an inevitable fact of life. At some point they are going to die.
such is the natural cycle, and I'm going to be extremely upset when it happens, but life life continues. We're probably going to get some ferrets. We have a dwarf hamster. The dwarf hamster is called Oreo. She likes to nibble my fingers. Probably because my fingers are cold, like, at all times, and no, like, animal that craves warmth wants to be in cold. But yeah, and she's meant to live in the desert, you know, and she's currently in England in the world's coldest house, so she's like always buried until she wants something. Oh, dwarf hamsters are so cute. Imperial thought that dwarf hamsters were the size of normal hamsters. He didn't realise that hamsters were huge. Oh, I should tell you guys the story about how I brought Oreo home. Oh, that sucks. I'm so sorry. Loki is a fantastic name for a dwarf hamster. Oh my god. I was tempted to call Oreo Marshmallow, but yeah. I had so at one point I went to a pet shop, and just out of curiosity, like, they were like, oh hey, do you want to check out the pet shop, they have like a really cool bird, and I was like, yeah, sure, why not, we'll walk up to the pet shop. And we went up, and they had like a cabinet, let's say, like full of like dwarf hamsters, and most of them were asleep, some of them were out. And we walked around. They had snakes, they have fish, birds, dwarf hamsters, amongst other things. I got Oreo a temporary home for her because it is way not big enough for a dwarf hamster, even though a lot of people say that it is because it doesn't have enough digging medium, and they like a lot of digging medium. If you get a rodent, please give them a lot of digging medium. They like to dig. They are burrowing creatures. Please, for the love of God. Dwarf hamsters need like 6 inches minimum of digging medium. Please give them digs. They like to make tunnels and burrow around and bury things. Please let them do that. And a bag of food, etc. for like, and her, for like a total of, I think it was like 20-15 quid, some stuff like that. She was like, all of that very cheap. And the reason why I got her is because on the 2 separate occasions that I went to that shop, she was actively trying to press against the glass. Like, I put my hand near the glass, and she would try and desperately get out to come and get to me. Like, she really wanted my hands. Yeah, like, Oreo was like the most vigorous, trying just to get to my hands. And the friends that I was with at the time were like, wow, she just really likes you, doesn't she? And I'm like, yeah, she really, really does like me. So I took a video of it, and then I was like, well, I won't get it now because, you know, it might just be a one-off thing. I might have had like a smell of food on my hands or whatever. And we went back the next day, and I made sure that I had, like, my hands were like totally clean. And she did the exact same thing. She wouldn't do it to anyone else. I was like, maybe like she just sees people putting their hands close to the glass and tries to do that with all of them. So they tried to do it, and she just ignored them. But with me, when it was me, she was trying to actively like squish her face between like the panels of glass to get out to me. And I'm like, wow. then this little bean wants to get out to me. So I bought her, and I managed to bring her home. At the time, Imperial was working, so I brought her home, and I kind of hid her a little bit, and I wasn't expecting Imperial to be like, hey, can you bring a thing into my workplace for me? And I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to pretend to be sad. Because my entire prank was that I was going to pretend when he came into the house that I was really sad because I couldn't get Oreo because I couldn't afford her or whatever it was. And I was really sad about it. Because like her and all the stuff would have been too expensive or whatever. So I go in and I had to pretend like I was super upset. Which is difficult for me because I have the worst poker face known to man. I giggle and smile over everything. So I go into his workplace and I'm like, yeah, I couldn't get Oreo. I just couldn't afford her. Or like she wasn't there, someone else had already bought her or whatever. And Imperial looks at me, looks at me and he goes, "Oh, can you just text your mum and ask her to come up and take you to the pet shop again?" And I was like, "No, like I'd have to pay her for petrol because it's so far away by car, and the shop's probably closed now anyway." And he's like, "Well, no, if you set off now." If she sets off now, like you'll be able to make it, and maybe like we can pay her back. Because I showed him the video of Oreo like pressing her face up against the glass to try and get out to me, for in the pet shop. So he was just as invested in this little bean as much as I was. And I was like, no, it's fine. Like I'll go later, like at some point during the month, and hope that she's still there, like when we get paid again. And I come home, and I sit down, and I go, I don't think I fooled him with that. I really hope that he doesn't realise that I was lying to him. Like at some point he'll click during work, go, nah, she's messing with me. And later on in the day he comes home and he comes upstairs and he's like, did you text your mum? And I was like, no. I went, yeah, but she said that like it wasn't worth it. And he was like, oh, but did you send her the video? And I was like, well, yeah, but like at the same time, my mum's on as much of a tight budget as we are, and she would need the money to get up there because she likes petrol money when she drives us to places, which isn't a lie. That is very true. My mother will ask us for petrol money, which I'm all happy to give her. You know, for services. And he comes into the front room and he sees the bright pink enclosure that she was in, and he looks at me with the face of the most utter betrayal that I'd ever seen in my life, and I just burst out giggling, and he goes, you bitch. How could you? All day I was so like genuinely upset for you because you couldn't get this hamster, and what the fuck? And I don't even like pink isn't even like my favorite color. Like blue is my favorite color, but because it was a female hamster, you know. Oh, yeah, he was. Oh my god, he was so betrayed. But like, by the end of it, it was fine because obviously, you know, yeah, we have a very adorable hamster now who loves him more than she loves me, I think. Probably on account that I got mice. I think she feels betrayed about the fact that we got mice. And I keep having to tell him not to, or like when we first got the mice, I was like, don't introduce them to each other because, if they start fighting, it's going to be terrible, and then they know of each other's existence and they're just going to be like trying to get at each other all the time. So like, don't introduce the dwarf hamster and the mice. Like, just as a precaution, don't do it. I don't think they'd normally meet in the natural habitat anyway, and I wouldn't know how to separate them without getting them injured if they did decide to fight. So yeah. But yeah, it was it was very very funny. It was extremely funny. Um, I think the only time I've ever played like that big of a prank on him, you know. And then, um, yeah, we've had her for like a year now. I think I think the anniversary of her is like just past, maybe. Yeah, Oreo home day was the 27th of October. I don't give pets birthdays, unless I know genuinely the day that they were born, because you can never be like 100% sure. Like I don't know how old Oreo is when she was in the pet shop, and I didn't ask, like an idiot. Um, so we've had her for a year, but she might be older than a year, and we've had the mice, I think, for almost a year as well, which I'm worried about because mice generally only live um, about a year, which is tragic. My mum actually banned me from getting mice because I would get just so upset when they died, you know? And my mum was like, "You're not getting any more mice because I can't bear to see your little heart break every time one of them dies." And I'm like, "Mum, I love you, but please." Yeah. Always thinking of me, she is. Yeah. Right, it's so tragic because like they're so small, so they don't live for very long. But I think I've managed to take really good care of the mice that we have. They have like a nice, relatively sized box to stay in, with lots of ventilation holes because I didn't want to keep them in the old Oreo's old home. They were in there initially, but then they started to itch a lot, and I was like, I wonder if it's something to do with the plastics of it, you know. I would love rats. Genuinely, I would love to have a pair of rats. But the problem is that they're so. Wolf was happy for me to have rats, and then he saw how big they got, and it freaked him out a little bit. They're like as big as your forearm, you know. They're like huge. Rats are massive. No, and compared to mice, which are like a max like half the size of your palm, you know. So he was like, no, they're too big. They freak me out. And I'm like, oh, but they're so cute. Look at this one, this little teddy bear. Like, how can you resist that? And he's like, no, they're too big. And I'm like, but ferrets are massive. And he's like, yeah, but ferrets are meant to be noodles. Plus, I think we already decided that we were going to go for ferrets because he he misses ferrets, and I've never had ferrets before, so I'm interested in them. Yeah, another little animal for me to fuck around with and find out. The only problem is our living room I don't think is particularly ferret proofed. There's like a bajillion holes in this room alone that they could hide in, and also the couch that they could hide under. I don't think we necessarily have a big enough room for them to play in, if that makes sense. Because obviously they need a lot of room to play in, and I fancy rats. Fancy rats. Yeah. But then I know that they're like adapt escapists, but I've also owned mice for a really long time, and mice and cats are also escape artists. mice, especially, or escape artists, mice will find a way to chew through their enclosure if you do not check it over at least once a day. You know, like, I've caught the mice jumping on top of their water bottle to try and get out before. So I'm like, well, I could deal with escape artists, especially since mice are like so small, and ferrets are huge, and so long as I keep a very good eye on them and like they have supervised playtime, and then when they're when they go back to sleep, I know that they're asleep and they'll be safe and they'll be okay. But during the daytime, when they're playful and they want feeding, like, all it would take really is one of us to stay with them to make sure that they're not escaping and playing appropriately. And yeah, I think I just heard the door knock. I'll be a second. That was entirely my imagination. I heard like a thunk on the window, so I guess something was just hitting into it. Waiting for packages is like the most stressful thing ever. I guess because I didn't answer the door at around 11, though they're actually giving it like the full amount of time. I'm a terrible plant mother. I've like forgotten to water my plants for days, so they're all looking very upset. It's fine. The plants they'll bloom. But yeah, ferrets. Ferrets are good. We were going to call them, I think it was Pipsqueak and Rascal, or Pipsqueak and Bandit, because I wanted a white one. Because I'm very fond of albino creatures after Shiva. And then Bandit because of the eye mask, But before we even like think about getting ferrets, I was like, well, we need to also make sure that I like the smell of them. Because if I don't like the smell of them, I'm not gonna want them. Like if the smell of them makes me feel ill, I'm not gonna want them. Like wet dog makes me feel sick. Also, on the topic of smelly animals, don't bathe your small creatures. Don't bathe your mice. Especially do not bathe your chinchillas. Please. I'm begging you. Don't bathe these creatures. In fact, like, don't really bathe your ferrets either, unless they're like particularly dirty, because you'll be wiping the oils away from them and then they get smellier, because they're trying to replace the oils. In the same way that you shouldn't wash your hair too often. Wash your body, obviously, like, often, but don't wash your hair often, because you will just dry it out. Sand baths are fantastic. You will never know joy like watching a dwarf hamster find her sand bath for the first time in her enclosure. I'm just absolutely going mental in it. Like, It's great. It's beautiful. I absolutely love watching Oreo take sand baths. It is so cute. Uh, I this thing still says. I mean, yeah. Don't wash often. Don't wash your hair often. A lot of creatures that people want to give baths to often generally clean themselves really, really well, like cats. Cats clean themselves super well, like super, super well. Mice and rats are like the most cleanliest animals on the planet, but because of past incidences such as the plague, people generally see them as dirty creatures, and it's like they're not. They're probably cleaner than you, like overall, unless you like literally just had a bath that day, because they're cleaning themselves all the time. You know, it would be like the human equivalent of like having a portable shower with you wherever you went and just having a shower every 10 minutes, which would be awful for your skin. Please don't have a shower every 10 minutes. You know, but like mice and rats are generally extremely clean. You don't need to give them baths. Most animals will take care of themselves. I prefer cats because they can take care of themselves. Like, you have a little tray, you have your bowl of food and water, and they can entertain themselves generally. 9 times out of 10, they probably just want to stay in your room where it's really warm and they're in your company, and they'll sleep for 90% of the day. So you don't really need to worry about them that much. And obviously, with your cats, don't let them outside. If they're on a lead, fair dues, but like don't let your cats don't have outdoor cats. A lot of people are like, oh, but it's mean to keep them indoors. It's meaner on the wildlife because they're killing like a lot of birds. Like 9 out of 10 animals that a cat will kill is for play. You know, they won't actually kill to eat it. They'll kill to play with it, which is just devastating. Like natural wildlife outside. So keep your cats indoors. It's, if like there's so much enrichment in the house that they can do. Like, I used to let a tap drip with water, and they used to just try and ban it out the air as it fell. You know, they were enthralled with the idea of a tap. Cats are very curious. You can get them toys, like thousands of toys that can do like a variety of things, but like don't let them outside. Unless unless they're in a lead or whatever, and you can like walk them around. Yeah, that's fine. But don't let them just roam around because they will just devastate everything in the nearby area, which is terrible. I definitely can't keep up with dogs. I am not a dog person. Like, I love dogs, but I don't like owning dogs. You know? Like, I see a cute puppy, and I'm like, yellow hair, cute puppy, cute doggo, I want to pet the doggo. Neural activation. But after I got bit by our old dog, I just never wanted to own a dog ever again. I don't think it'd be a good idea. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna have to like BRB at some point to get breakfast, because honestly, I need me some breakfast. Yeah. Like, I think that, and they're really noisy, and I get like, I don't want to say overstimulated, but like I get annoyed by a lot of loud noise very easily. And obviously, if you don't like a lot of loud noise, having a dog is a terrible idea because dogs will bark at everything and anything. Um, if you can handle having like a lot of noise and having like an animal non-stop talking and you're active enough that you feel like you can go out like 3 times a day to give it walks and all that stuff, and you don't mind picking up poop with your bare hands and nothing but a bag covering it, by all means go for it. But I'm very much a cat person, and there's a lot of people that don't understand how cats work and hate cats because of it. But like, I love both, but I can't own dogs, but I can own cats because cats won't like yell at you a lot. They'll meow when they need something from you because that's the only way that they can get your attention. But you can teach cats to like do other things because they will do the thing that gets the most attention from you. So if you're responding every time they're meowing at you, they'll meow at you. In the same way that there was a video of a deaf man teaching his cat how to sign, and the cat wanted a bit of food off his plate, and you could see the cat like looking at him and mimicking like the hand to lips motion to like, I want food, because the cat realized if I meow it doesn't do anything, but if I do this it gets me food. Yeah. Cats are a lesson in consent, yes. 9 times out of 10 when you're stroking a cat on its belly, if you just like stroke, you know, if you don't like tickle it like you do with dogs, they won't attack your hand because you're like neuron activating their predator instinct, and they're clawing your hand because they think you're prey and they want to eat you. Sometimes they do that because they're teaching you how to hunt, like they're teaching you how to play and stuff, because to them you're just a big dumb cat, you know. You are their child, you know. Cats are good parents, dogs are good children. You know, that's a good way of phrasing it too. That and for the most part, if a cat's tail starts like swishing, don't pat it. That bad boy's annoyed. Unless it's specifically the very end of the tail, that's playful. But like the whole tail, do not, do not, don't do it. Don't do it. Otherwise you might find your hand clawed. But a lot of cats generally you have to be careful with and really understand how your cat's body language works. You know, they're like, oh, but like she was rubbing all over my legs and really meowing at me and trying to get pets and stuff. And I just fed her, so she didn't want food, and she had a full bowl of water, so she didn't want water, and you know, and then she rolled over on her belly, and I stroked her, and then she just started clawing me, and you're like, there's some steps there that you missed. Cats don't just start clawing you. She might have wanted to play, you know. She might have been happy with the pets and then wanted to play, and you didn't realize that she wanted to play, so she clawed at you, you know. I think I've only been scratched, like, actually by my cat once, because I'd spent so much time with a dog, and I kind of forgot that you can't stroke cats forever. They get annoyed if you touch them for too long, even if they're, like, stood right next to you begging to be touched. They don't like to be touched for too long. It's just learning how they work, and being aware of how they work. Another animal I wouldn't recommend getting is birds. If you don't like a lot of noise, don't get birds. Do not get birds. Birds will make all the noise in the world. No, I like a lot of quiet. It's like I like noise, but only if like it's consented noise. Like I can handle general like move around noise, like if someone's playing a radio like downstairs, or like in the daytime, like if the TV's on, or there's a washing machine, or ambient noise of fridges and plugs and stuff. Like I can handle that. But like if I'm sat on the bus and somebody starts playing music like out loud on their phone, I I think that annoys everyone. But you know, and if you don't have space for them to fly, etc. Yeah, it's like, birds do need to be able to be let out their cage to fly. Just keep that in mind if you ever feel like getting a bird. They do need like flying range unless they have clipped wings. Which I don't entirely agree on, but I understand why it's done. You know, because some birds will just fly up onto the ceiling and never come down. And it can be a nightmare getting them back into their cage again. But yeah, yeah. I once had like a policewoman go around to my ex's house, and we were waiting to submit like a police statement, and his mother was like, "Oh, we'll let the bird out for a little bit because it doesn't look like the officer's coming very like soon." So they let the bird out. The bird flied around for about 10 minutes, and the police officer showed up, and we were like, "Oh, sorry, we were just getting the bird back into the cage again because we had to let them out to fly." And the officer kind of like went, "Why would you let the bird out knowing that you had to, you know, give a statement to an officer like in like a moment?" And like internally, I'm just like, because the needs of the animal precede your needs to do this. Because it's an animal and it has no control over, its entire being. It can't just unlock its cage and let itself out to fly. You know? And it's an animal. It's like, oh, why would you go walk your dog? It's like, because the dog needs walking. Like I'm sorry that you couldn't be hasty enough to get to them. It's just, what the fuck? Feel like your partner going out to walk the dog when you have to make a statement, and then the officer getting mad that your partner's gone out to walk the dog, and it's like, I get it, but like the needs of the animal like need to be fulfilled. I'm not neglecting my animal because you think you're important enough for it, you know? If the thing needs feeding, the thing is going to get fed, I'm sorry. But like, you do not have control over like my entire life simply because you're a police officer, I'm afraid. Like, understand people have pets and that they need to fulfill the needs of the pets because the pet cannot fulfill the need itself because it is being contained. And if we neglect the needs of the pet, then we're neglecting the pet. And that's a completely different crime. And I'd rather I not be arrested for, like, animal abuse, you know? Like, no, it can't wait another half an hour. The thing is dying. Please. Let me do it. Another pet that I've always wanted actually is a snake. It's also okay. I've always wanted a snake because snakes are cute. I love snakes. But I also know that I am shit at being a parent in any way, and I would forget to feed the snake. The other day, Wolf looked at me and went, "When did you last feed the mice and the hamster?" And my brain immediately went into overdrive, like, when did you last feed them? When did you last feed them? When did you last feed them? For the life of me, I couldn't remember when I last fed the mice and the hamster, which is terrible. And it's like, maybe you should start making a note of that. I'm like, yeah, but like my calendar is already just so bad, like just so inundated with stuff that like, oof. Oh, no, I don't have room for it. I have room for nothing else on my calendar. I have every other animal under the sun on my phone as an emoji, but I don't have a shark? Really? You'll have 2 whales, a seal. Oh no, there's a shark. Cool. I like sharks. Well, another reason why I wouldn't be able to own a snake is because I love mice too much. Like, the idea of, like, pinkies makes me sad. Like, whenever I'm watching videos about snakes, I have to, like, skip the feeding because it makes me genuinely sad to see, like, pinkies or fuzzies being eaten. You know? And, like, that and the house is generally quite cold. I know you're meant to have, like, a hot and a cold zone for snakes so that they can regulate their own temperature, but I feel like it would be too hot or too cold, and you need like so much more equipment as well for a snake than you do like a mouse. Like with a mouse, you need like a couple things for enrichment, bedding that isn't wool or cotton. Do not put cotton balls as bedding. Like, don't get that fucking cottony shit. It says perfect bedding for smaller. It's not. They will eat it. It will clog their stuff. They will die. Do not put that in. Get tissue paper, not scented, and rip it into thin strips, and they will use that as bedding. Use that as bedding. Do not use cotton. I will come to your house. I will eat your toes. Don't do it. Just don't. Right? I. Yeah, mice. They like you can even give them like toilet roll tubes, and they'll use that as enrichment. They'll bite through that. They will have a whale of a time biting through that and crawling through it, having and playing around it. It's great. It's fun to watch. Like a running wheel of some kind. I think my mice are too fat. Um, but yeah, don't give them cotton. But with snakes, you need so many different things. Like you need to give them a hide, a water dish, an appropriate substrate, and then you need to sometimes hand feed them. And if you have a fussy snake, you need to like shove the food down their throat. Not literally, but also kind of literally. I don't know if you've ever seen a video of like snake experts like trying to induce a snake to eat, where they have to like pinch its mouth open and then like wiggle the food in its mouth to try and just get the receptors to go, ooh, food, and actually start moving all the muscles. It's horrifying. I would not be able to do that. I think Wolf would. Wolf would be able to do that because he he would prioritize the needs of the animal, and I would be crying. I could probably suck it up. But I would also be very sad while doing it. And then I was like, oh, but there are snakes that eat like bugs, like like mealworms and like crickets and stuff. So like I could get them, and then I remembered that creepy crawlies make my skin creepy crawly, you know. Every time I've held a snake, I've loved the feeling, and I've always like I just keep wanting a snake. But then you also can't play with snakes. You can't like get snakes out and play with them. That's another thing that I like to do. I like to be able to actually get out and play with the thing. You know, that's why I can't have fish, because they're pretty to look at, but you can't do anything with them. You know, you can't like. Or maybe I just never looked into it. If you could play with your fish. I mean, I also like bugs. I like some bugs, but I don't like a lot of bugs. You know, like I couldn't keep a bug as a pet. I don't think I could do that. I'm happy to let bugs exist, as long as they're not spiders. My brother used to have 2 tarantulas. In fact, let me tell you the story of my brother and his 2 tarantulas. I'm going to predate it with a story about the cat that he had. The cat was called Peggy. And the reason she was called Peggy is because she had a bad back leg that fused wrong when she was born, and we didn't take her to the vet in time for them to like fix it so she could walk normally. So for all of her life, she would kind of hobble around on her back and kind of gallop. But she was perfectly fine. You know, she could run, she could jump vaguely. She could meow, she could eat. She was fine. She could use the toilet. Yeah. She was a perfectly fine cat. It was just like one of her legs was just fucked. Now, keep in mind that this cat is disabled, right? She can jump, but she can't jump very well. When she was trying to get on like a chair that was at most like like 2 feet high, she would struggle. Like she'd jump up and then she'd have to like to get on top of it. Yeah. My brother got 2 tarantulas, Cleo and Sass. I believe he had Cleo first. Now, Cleo, one of them was like a tamed spider, like raised like in the hands of people for like since its conception, and the other one was vaguely more wild, where she hadn't been hand trained as much. And you know, I liked the fact that he had pets that he could care about, but I didn't want to go anywhere near them. And he used to bring them downstairs with one of them like on his back or somewhere, and I like remember just being like, "Can you please give us warning? You have 2 arachnophobes in the family, me and my dad. Please, for the love of God, like tell us when you're bringing one of the spiders down so we can like emotionally and mentally prepare to see a gigantic spider. Thank you." I held this gigantic spider. I held the wild one. I held the one that wasn't necessarily like tamed, like hand reared. So good job me. Good job Child me for being so brave. One day I come home from school and I hear that Peggy is in a lot of trouble. And I'm like, why is Peggy in a lot of trouble? What has she done? And my mum and my brother who is very distraught, goes, she killed one of my spiders. I don't remember which one she killed, but she killed one of them. And I was like, well, that doesn't really surprise me, but like, how did she do it? You know, because cats are predators, right? Cats go after most things that move. If she's she's curious about something, she's going to get into it, and she's going to kill it. because that's how cats are. That's why when you have pets, you typically keep them out the reach of the cats. Like, oh, she pushed the door open to my room and she got into the spider's container and she killed it. And I'm like, the disabled cat, where were you keeping the spiders? Because obviously I didn't like the spiders, so I didn't really go in his room because spiders. Dear viewers, he had put the spiders like at floor level. Behind the door, there was like a little shelf, and he had one on the bottom and one on the top. Do you remember, like, think back earlier to when I said that Peggy's a disabled cat who can't really jump more than 1.5 feet, maybe 2 if she was feeling good that day. He had a dresser that was taller than that. All he would have needed was an extension cord to get to like the plug on the opposite side near the radiator, and it would have been fine. He could have just kept them up there, you know? But he didn't. He kept them on the ground. And I remember looking at them and going, I don't know why you're so surprised. Like, you left the door open slightly so she could push it open, and like, bear in mind it's a heavy door, and then you kept the prey animals on ground level where she could reach them. Of course. And also, you know, to add insult to injury, you've been training her to find house spiders and kill them. Whenever you see a house spider, you feed it to the cat. You feed it to Peggy. Why are you surprised that she found a spider and killed it? Like, I am extremely sorry and apologetic that your pet has died, but that is the stupidest way your pet could have possibly died. That was just a gross amount of negligence to like your entire situation. When I got mice after the fact, I kept them like my bed would be in the middle of the room. There'd be at least like a foot of space, and then there was a big what's it called? Like a dresser, like a big dresser, and the mice would be like in the middle of it, surrounded by things, so the cats couldn't jump from my bed onto the dresser to get to the mice, obviously, because I was like, well, Peggy's disabled, she won't be able to jump up there anyway, and our other 3 cats, well, one of them doesn't have the balls to do it, and the other 2 won't be able to get up there anyway because they have no safe perch, so they never got up there. So yeah, I miss Peggy. Peggy died last year. Rest her soul. May she be having a hell of a time in cat heaven, also known as small animal hell. Yeah, I was like, that. My brother he's grown a lot since then. He now has a child, so I hope he's grown a lot since then. Oh my god. He at one point didn't like feed my fish. I had fish as well at one point, and then later on I got a second fish, and this predated the spiders, I believe, because my mum was like, oh, like, he shouldn't have to feed your fish because they're not, you know, his responsibility. Like, when we leave, you know, you should feed them. And I'm like, but I'm coming with you, I can't feed them, I need someone else to do that, they're gonna starve, like, if you don't feed them for 3 days, like, you have to feed them, please feed them. And my brother was like, oh, but, like, you wouldn't feed the spiders if I had spiders. And I was like, that's because I'm scared of spiders. You're not scared of fish. Are you scared of fish? And he's like, well, no, I'm not scared of fish. But like, I don't want to do it. And I'm like, please just feed. Literally, it takes 2 seconds of your morning to get out of, like, roll out of bed at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then get a pinch of food and just drop it in, and then just go about your day. You don't have to do it any other time of day. That's it. Just once in the morning. That'll do. He killed my fish twice. I've never had fish since. But he killed like two. Like, he killed 3 fish. Because I went camping twice. You know. Gross negligence. I'm happy he remembers to feed his child. It's genuinely. I'm still very mad about that. That happened when I was like. That happened like over 10 years ago, and I'm still miffed. You know? That's how bad it is. Honestly. Genuinely. I'm. I should probably go get food soon. I've been saying I should go get food soon, and then just straight up have not gone to get food soon. But I should get food soon because I am hungry, and I didn't have breakfast before I started the stream. You know, terribly of me, if I do say so myself. How dare I? I'm also kind of waiting for someone else to like come online, because then I can be like, oh yeah, if you guys want more stuff, you can go over there. You know, you need more entertainment to your lives, you can go over there. But no, I'm not. Instead I'm just sitting here talking and being terrible and not eating. Yeah, but well, yeah, I don't think I really have anything to eat. Do I? I could have a pot noodle. Should I have a pot noodle or toast? I'll probably find something. I'll find something. Okay. I'm gonna call it there because I do need food. I will be back on later in about about 7 hours, 6 to 7 hours time. I normally have a schedule up on my Twitch page. So if you want to catch me later in a silent stream where I play Journey, then by all means come along and join me for then. I always like having the company. If any of my lovely viewers right now aren't currently following me, please do. I do this almost every morning, where I read through a book and then I'll have a chat before and after I've read it. I try to read 5 chapters every single time. And and yeah, so please, by all means, come along and join me for that later. You won't hear my voice, obviously, because it's a silent stream. We'll just be vibing, but you're more than welcome to just have it on in the background if you're studying or whatever. Mouse failing at journey, lo-fi sounds to study to. But yeah, enjoy the rest of your days. Have a great time, my lovelies, and I will see you later today. I'll put my end stream on my little end card because it's adorable and I love it. But yeah, goodbye. Enjoy yourselves.